The Arctic stretches beyond the bounds of imagination, a realm where ice and silence dominate, and where the landscape itself seems to withhold its secrets. Across this frozen expanse, explorers have reported phenomena that defy explanation. Ships abandoned in drifting ice, phantom landmasses glimpsed through frigid haze, and strange signals echoing over desolate tundras. Each expedition carved a fragile path through the frozen wilderness, encountering evidence that both fascinated and unsettled those who dared to venture so far from the known world. You will traverse these stark and isolated regions, moving alongside the men and women who documented the inexplicable. Massive iron meteorites glinting in pale sunlight, eerie magnetic anomalies that confounded instruments, and remote settlements abandoned yet echoing with human presence. From the shifting ice floes of Wrangel Island to the shadowed reaches of Sannikov land, every moment exposes the Arctic's hidden histories and enigmatic forces, leaving traces of mystery that endure long after the snow has settled. The Franklin expedition's abandoned ships in the ice. Cold Arctic winds sweep across the labyrinth of channels that make up the Canadian High Arctic, where shifting ice and long winters once concealed the fate of one of the most ambitious polar voyages ever attempted. In May 1845, two ships of the Royal Navy, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, departed England under the command of Sir John Franklin, carrying 129 officers and crew to chart the final unknown sections of the Northwest Passage. For 2 years, fragments of information reached the outside world as expected, then the reports stopped. When search expeditions began to push into the Arctic in the following decade, they encountered something that transformed a routine rescue mission into one of the most unsettling discoveries in the history of polar exploration. Franklin's expedition had been carefully prepared according to the standards of the era. Both vessels had already served in Antarctic exploration under James Clark Ross, and were strengthened with iron plates to resist crushing ice. Their hulls carried steam engines adapted from railway locomotives, allowing the ships to manoeuvre through narrow channels when the wind failed. Inside their holds were 3 years' worth of preserved food packed in thousands of newly manufactured tins, along with scientific instruments intended to map coastlines and measure magnetic conditions across the polar region. Confidence ran high when the ships sailed from Greenhithe on the River Thames, watched by spectators who believed they were witnessing the final chapter in the centuries-long search for a navigable route through the Arctic. The last confirmed sighting of the expedition came in July 1845, when whaling ships encountered Erebus and Terror in Baffin Bay, near the entrance to Lancaster Sound. The crews of those vessels reported that Franklin's ships appeared well supplied and in good spirits, as they waited for favourable ice conditions before continuing west. After that moment, the Arctic silence closed around them. Months passed without a word, then years. By 1848, concern in Britain began to grow, and the Admiralty organised a series of search expeditions that would scatter across the Arctic archipelago, each attempting to trace the path Franklin might have taken. These search parties gradually began to collect strange and troubling evidence along the remote coastlines of King William Island and nearby waters. Inuit hunters described encounters with starving European sailors travelling south across the ice, dragging boats and heavy equipment in desperate attempts to reach the mainland. Such stories were difficult for British officials to accept at first, yet they repeated with remarkable consistency among different communities who had no reason to fabricate them. According to these accounts, the men appeared exhausted and confused, moving slowly through terrain that even experienced Arctic travellers found punishing. The first physical relics soon followed those testimonies. Search expeditions discovered scattered pieces of equipment along the shores and across the frozen channels, fragments of boats, cooking utensils, silverware engraved with the names of officers from Franklin's crew, and discarded clothing that had once been part of naval uniforms. Each item suggested that the expedition had not vanished suddenly, but had instead deteriorated gradually, leaving a trail across the ice as conditions worsened. For investigators, these objects raised a difficult question. If the ships themselves had survived the initial winters, why had the crew abandoned them at all? In 1859, a breakthrough arrived when an expedition led by Francis Leopold McClintock located a small stone cairn on the northwest coast of King William Island. Inside it lay the only written record left behind by Franklin's expedition. The document, now known as the Victory Point Note, revealed that the ships had become trapped in pack ice off the island in September 1846. It also contained a grim update added 2 years later, stating that Sir John Franklin had died on the 11th of June 1847 and that the surviving officers and crew had finally decided to abandon the ships in April 1848. Even with this discovery, the mystery only deepened. The note stated that 105 men remained alive at the time the ships were deserted, yet almost no trace of their subsequent journey appeared in written form. Instead, searchers found unsettling clues scattered along the coastline, skeletons lying in shallow graves, pieces of boats resting miles inland, and objects that suggested the sailors had attempted to haul heavy supplies across the ice. Some of the boats were packed with items that seemed strangely impractical for such a desperate trek, including sets of silverware and thick volumes of books. One particular discovery captured the imagination of investigators. In 1859, McClintock's team uncovered a lifeboat mounted on a sledge along the southern coast of King William Island. Inside it were 2 human skeletons, along with loaded guns, clothing, and carefully arranged supplies that appeared never to have been used. The scene suggested that the men had collapsed during their journey and died exactly where they lay. Yet the arrangement of the equipment implied a degree of order that seemed inconsistent with the chaos expected during a catastrophic retreat through Arctic wilderness. Accounts gathered from Inuit witnesses added further unsettling details. Some hunters reported finding a large wooden ship locked in the ice long after the crew had disappeared, drifting slowly through the channels before eventually sinking. Others spoke of discovering camps where abandoned cooking pots still sat beside extinguished fires. Several testimonies described human remains that bore signs suggesting extreme desperation during the final stages of the expedition. Though these reports were controversial when first recorded, later forensic examinations of bones recovered from the region would confirm that at least some of the sailors had resorted to measures almost unimaginable within the disciplined structure of a Royal Navy expedition. For more than a century, the exact locations of Franklin's ships remained unknown, preserved somewhere beneath Arctic waters that freeze solid for much of the year. Explorers and historians searched repeatedly across the channels surrounding King William Island, guided by fragments of testimony and scattered relics. Each expedition added new pieces to the puzzle, yet never quite reached the centre of the mystery. The ships themselves, the silent witnesses to the final decisions of the crew, seemed to have vanished as completely as the men who once commanded them. Only in the 21st century did technology finally begin to reveal what had long been hidden beneath the ice. In 2014, a Canadian-led search expedition located the wreck of HMS Erebus, resting upright on the seabed of Wilmot and Crampton Bay. 2 years later, the wreck of HMS Terror was discovered in Terror Bay, remarkably well preserved in cold Arctic waters. Images taken by remotely operated vehicles showed cabins, equipment, and even glass windows still intact after more than 160 years. The condition of the wrecks created a new layer of mystery. Terror, in particular, appeared almost undisturbed, as though the crew had simply stepped away. Doors remained closed, drawers still contained personal belongings, and scientific instruments lay where they had been stored during the voyage. The ship did not appear to have been violently destroyed by ice, nor did it show clear signs of desperate attempts to escape. Instead, it rested quietly on the ocean floor, its interior spaces sealed in darkness since the moment the last sailor left its deck. Archaeologists continue to examine the wrecks and the scattered remains found across King William Island, attempting to understand how an expedition so carefully prepared could have unravelled so completely. Evidence suggests that a combination of harsh environmental conditions, nutritional deficiencies, and the crushing pressure of Arctic ice slowly eroded the expedition's ability to survive. Yet even with these explanations, many details remain difficult to reconcile with the calm and methodical appearance of the abandoned ships. Because somewhere in the frozen channels of the Arctic, 2 ships once waited silently in the ice long after the men who sailed them had vanished into the white horizon. The Andrée balloon expedition's final photographs. Nearly 3 decades after 3 Swedish explorers vanished into the Arctic sky, a weathered camera discovered on the icy shore of Kvitøya began revealing the silent record left behind by the ill-fated Andrée balloon expedition. When members of a Norwegian expedition landed on the remote island in August 1930, they expected little more than scattered driftwood and the occasional remains of earlier hunting camps. Instead, they encountered relics belonging to one of the most daring and mysterious attempts ever made to reach the North Pole. Among the objects partially buried in snow and gravel lay notebooks, tools and photographic equipment, their surfaces etched with frost that had preserved them for decades. When the camera's film was later developed, it revealed images taken during the final journey of the long-lost expedition, each frame whispering secrets of men who had vanished without a trace. At the end of the 19th century, engineer Salomon Auguste Andrée convinced much of Europe that the shifting winds above the Arctic Ocean might carry a hydrogen balloon directly across the North Pole. The idea seemed bold, yet strangely practical in an era fascinated with new technologies and scientific progress. Balloons had already demonstrated their ability to travel vast distances with favourable winds, and Andrée believed the steady currents of the polar atmosphere could carry a well-designed craft across the unexplored regions of the Arctic. His project gained financial backing from Swedish institutions and international supporters who saw the voyage as a chance to place their nation at the forefront of polar exploration, imagining that this single flight might redefine the boundaries of human achievement in the far north. Morning light over Danes Island in Svalbard illuminated a strange sight on July 11, 1897, as the enormous balloon Ornen, meaning the Eagle, slowly rose above the watching crowd and drifted northward into the unknown. Suspended beneath its vast envelope was a gondola carrying Andrée and his two companions, engineer Knut Frankel and photographer Nils Strindberg. Their plan relied on drag ropes that trailed along the ice and sea below, allowing them to slow the balloon and adjust its direction using sails attached to the gondola. Spectators watched as the craft lifted steadily into the pale Arctic sky, disappearing beyond the horizon as though carried into another world, a tiny silhouette against an empty expanse of white and blue. Confidence faded almost immediately once the balloon entered open sky, when the drag ropes designed to control its movement began failing under the weight of accumulating ice. As moisture in the cold air froze onto the balloon surface, the craft became heavier and increasingly difficult to manage. The ropes snapped or detached during the first hours of flight, eliminating the only method the crew had for steering. Without them, the balloon drifted wherever the winds carried it, rising and falling unpredictably as ice formed along the envelope and rigging. The three men must have felt the growing sense of helplessness in the immense Arctic silence, with nothing to guide them but the shifting winds and the faint pale horizon. After only 3 days in the air, the expedition's daring attempt to reach the North Pole ended abruptly as the balloon descended onto unstable pack ice deep within the Arctic Ocean. The landing occurred on July 14, 1897, far from any known settlement or shipping route. Though the crew survived the descent, the balloon had become unusable, its fabric coated in ice and its lifting capacity greatly reduced. What had begun as an aerial voyage now transformed into a grueling overland journey across one of the most hostile landscapes on Earth, where every step carried the risk of hidden cracks in the ice or sudden open water stretching across the frozen plains. Instead of abandoning their mission entirely, the explorers began documenting their unexpected trek across the drifting ice, with photographer Nils Strindberg carefully using his camera to preserve each stage of the journey. The equipment he carried was not designed for the brutal conditions of the Arctic, yet he continued to take photographs whenever possible. His images captured camps set against endless white horizons, sledges loaded with supplies, and the three men standing together beside their improvised shelters. At the time, these photographs were simply records of an expedition still underway, yet they now offer an uncanny glimpse into lives teetering on the edge of survival, in a world that seemed almost otherworldly in its starkness and silence. Hauling heavy sledges across jagged pressure ridges and fields of fractured sea ice, the three men slowly advanced through a landscape that constantly shifted beneath their feet. Each sledge weighed hundreds of kilograms and carried food, equipment, and instruments salvaged from the balloon. Progress was painfully slow. Some days they managed only a few kilometers before exhaustion forced them to stop and establish camp. The ice itself drifted with the ocean currents, often carrying them away from the direction they hoped to travel, while the endless Arctic sky above seemed indifferent to human struggle, vast, pale, and impossibly empty. Images recovered decades later reveal a subtle transformation in the expedition's atmosphere, as early photographs of organised camps gradually give way to scenes marked by fatigue and growing uncertainty. In the first pictures, the explorers appear composed and purposeful, standing beside neatly arranged sledges and tents. Later images show harsher conditions. Snow covers the equipment, and the men's expressions appear more strained. Though photographs cannot capture the full reality of their struggle, they hint at the mounting challenges the expedition faced with each passing week. There is an eerie clarity in those frozen frames, a sense of anticipation that something unknowable was pressing closer with each step the men took. Repeated attempts to steer toward the distant islands of Franz Josef Land were quietly undermined by the relentless drift of the Arctic ice itself. Maps suggested that reaching those islands might provide access to shelter or passing ships, yet the moving ice constantly altered their course. Winds shifted, currents carried the frozen surface southward, and open water occasionally blocked their path. What appeared straightforward on a map became an unpredictable maze of moving ice fields. Every misstep felt magnified in the oppressive Arctic silence, the explorers' determination pitted against a vast and unforgiving environment that offered no mercy and no guidance. Through fog and shifting horizons, the explorers eventually reached the remote island of Kvitoya, a barren outpost of rock and snow rising from one of the most isolated corners of the Arctic Ocean. After weeks of travel across unstable ice, the sight of solid ground must have seemed like a moment of relief. Kvitoya, however, offered little more than frozen shoreline and a massive ice cap that dominated most of its surface. The island lay far from established routes used by explorers or hunters, leaving the expedition still trapped in extreme isolation. It was a place seemingly untouched for centuries, where the silence pressed in so heavily it seemed almost tangible. Long after the expedition disappeared, a Norwegian sealing vessel landed on that same island in 1930 and uncovered a campsite that had remained undisturbed for 33 years. Among the scattered relics were cooking utensils, sledges, scientific instruments, and the remains of the explorers themselves. Nearby lay notebooks containing diary entries written during the final stages of the journey. These documents confirmed the route the expedition had taken after landing their balloon and provided insight into their final weeks in the Arctic. The careful placement of equipment suggested that the explorers had attempted to maintain order, even in their last days, as if preserving a record for eyes they somehow knew would come much later. Careful development of the recovered film soon revealed something extraordinary: dozens of photographs taken by the explorers themselves during their final march across the ice. Despite decades spent in freezing conditions, the negatives had survived well enough for technicians to produce clear images. For the first time since 1897, the world could see what the expedition had witnessed during its last journey. The photographs did not show dramatic disasters or obvious catastrophes. Instead, they displayed ordinary moments of exploration set within an unforgiving environment. Yet knowing the fate of the men casts a shadow over every image, making even the simplest campsite appear profoundly ominous. Among the last images preserved on those fragile negatives are quiet scenes of sledges, tents, and endless frozen horizons that offer no clear explanation for what finally overtook the expedition. The men appear determined, even in the harshest conditions, standing beside equipment carefully arranged for the next stage of travel. Nothing in the photograph suggests the precise moment when their strength failed or when circumstances became impossible to overcome. The final frames simply stop, leaving only the stark Arctic landscape stretching beyond the edges of the image, a frozen world indifferent to human endurance. The photographs end abruptly, leaving behind only the uneasy sense that the camera stopped recording just before the Arctic revealed its final answer, as though the very ice itself had swallowed the final act of a journey that no one would ever witness firsthand. The Jeannette expedition's strange Arctic drift discovery. A sudden crunch beneath the hull marked the moment the USS Jeannette became ensnared in the Arctic pack ice, and from that instant the ship's course would be dictated by frozen currents beyond human control. What had been intended as a bold attempt to reach the North Pole via the Bering Strait transformed into a slow, relentless journey across the shifting ice, with men and vessel alike at the mercy of forces they could neither measure nor predict. The surrounding expanse stretched endlessly in every direction, a blinding panorama of white and blue, broken only by occasional pressure ridges that groaned under invisible strain, a reminder that even the strongest ship might be crushed by the silent, unstoppable power of the Arctic. De Long and his officers had boarded the vessel months earlier with a clear plan to reach the North Pole via the Bering Strait, equipped with supplies, instruments, and the highest hopes of scientific acclaim. George W. De Long, an experienced naval officer, led a crew meticulously chosen for skill and endurance, each man trained to withstand the brutal conditions of the northern seas. The Jeannette itself had been reinforced for ice travel with a specially strengthened hull and powerful engines meant to push through moderate flows. From the outset, the expedition exuded confidence, and for a brief period, the crew believed that careful navigation and the ship's design would allow them to chart a path through one of the most treacherous regions on Earth. From the first days at sea, jagged ice floes and relentless storms tested both ship and crew, hinting that the Arctic would impose its own rules far from any charted expectations. Winds howled across the polar horizon, carrying sheets of ice and snow that battered the decks and froze exposed machinery. Crew members learned to measure drift against landmarks almost invisible under the glare of white light, noting how even small ice movements could shift the vessel several hundred meters in hours. Despite meticulous planning, it quickly became apparent that the Arctic demanded both respect and adaptation, a silent teacher whose lessons were often harsh and unforgiving. By early September, the vessel shuddered as immense pressure from surrounding ice pressed against her sides, locking the Jeannette in a frozen cage that refused to yield. The crew witnessed walls of ice rising against the hull like frozen mountains, and the sound of metal bending under the strain reverberated through the ship. While provisions and morale remained intact, the psychological toll of being immobilized in a world that offered no escape began to weigh heavily. Each shift in the ice brought uncertainty, and each creak or fracture whispered of dangers unseen, suggesting that even the strongest ice might conceal lethal flaws. Life aboard the trapped ship became a strange mixture of routine and tension as sailors adjusted to the constant sway of ice beneath them and the eerie silence of a world suspended in white. Men maintained the ship, repaired minor damages, and recorded daily observations, while others monitored the ice for signs of instability. Meals were rationed carefully, and every action took on new significance when a misstep might lead to a fall into freezing water or a collision with jagged floes. Sleep offered little relief. The ship groaned continuously, a constant reminder that the Arctic could change everything without warning. Measurements of latitude and longitude revealed the strange drift. The Jeannette was moving in patterns no one had predicted, carried hundreds of miles from their intended route by forces that seemed almost deliberate. Navigational logs noted that ice currents did not conform to prevailing charts, and small islands or coastlines appeared unexpectedly in positions that confounded expectations. For the crew, the drift became both a mystery and a menace. No one could explain why the ship followed a path so divergent from anticipated currents. The ice, though lifeless, seemed to dictate its own direction, bending the expedition to its will with a quiet but relentless insistence. Each morning brought the creaking roar of ice shifting along the hull, a subtle but constant reminder that the frozen sea could crush everything aboard with little warning. The sound carried far across the decks, sometimes rising to a low, ominous moan as ridges ground against the ship's sides. Observing this, the crew learned to anticipate pressure changes and respond quickly. But there was always a lingering unease, a sense that the Arctic could alter the course of their lives in an instant. Even the most mundane tasks took on heightened significance under the ever-present threat of ice movement. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ice, threatening to split open beneath the ship's keel, and for weeks every step on deck or below carried the possibility of catastrophe. Crew members moved with care, using poles to test surfaces before venturing onto the floes, while officers charted the ice's subtle shifts. Though the Jeannette had survived months of drift, the constant threat of sudden fractures, hidden leads of water, or pressure ridges capable of piercing the hull cast a persistent shadow over the expedition. Each day carried a tension that was invisible yet profoundly felt, making the Arctic itself a character in the story of survival. Charts and diaries meticulously recorded the drift, noting anomalies in current speed and direction, a silent testimony to the mysterious behaviour of the Arctic ice itself. Observations indicated that the ships sometimes travelled in directions opposite to prevailing winds or currents, defying simple explanations. These records, intended for future scientific analysis, now serve as evidence of the bizarre forces that shaped the Jeannette's journey. Even experienced Arctic navigators would later describe the drift as unpredictable and unlike anything observed elsewhere, suggesting that nature's patterns in this region were still largely unknown and perhaps unknowable. When the hull began to fracture and water seeped through the seams, De Long ordered preparations to abandon ship, aware that the ice had become a trap as lethal as any storm. Crews lowered boats and organised sledges, salvaging provisions and instruments while leaving the vessel to its fate. The process was painstaking, conducted in bitter cold and under constant threat of ice shifting violently. The decision to leave was both pragmatic and terrifying. Abandoning the ship meant facing a journey across frozen expanses without the protection of sturdy shelter, yet remaining aboard guaranteed disaster. The crew launched sledges and small boats onto the shifting ice, following a path dictated not by maps, but by the unpredictable whims of drifting flows and unseen currents beneath the frozen surface. Men laboured to haul supplies across uneven ice, their tracks disappearing in the snow as the floes moved beneath them. Navigation became a matter of instinct, careful observation, and trial and error, with the Arctic's vast emptiness offering no guidance. Every day was an exercise in survival, a test of endurance against a landscape that was simultaneously static and in constant, imperceptible motion. In the final, desperate days, the ice's strange patterns compounded their suffering, separating men, exhausting resources, and scattering hope, leaving only the stark enormity of the Arctic around them. De Long and his companions struggled to maintain cohesion and direction, yet fatigue, frostbite, and hunger took their toll. Some parties were lost entirely, disappearing into the blank expanse where sea, ice, and sky merged indistinguishably. The drift that had begun months earlier now seemed almost conscious, its vast, silent currents shaping human lives in ways impossible to predict. Survivors later recounted a journey that had been shaped not only by cold and hunger, but by a drift so inexplicably persistent that the forces moving the ice seemed almost sentient in their silent, relentless power. The records, maps, and diaries they left behind testify to the astonishing reach of natural forces, illustrating how human ambition could be both magnified and undone by the Arctic's immutable patterns. Even today, scientists and historians marvel at how far the Jeannette travelled while trapped, and the expedition remains a study in the unpredictable intersection of human endeavour and environmental extremity. Far beyond the edge of any chart, the currents that once carried the Jeannette continue to whisper across the Arctic, guarding secrets that no human eye has yet witnessed. The Greely expedition's unsettling discoveries at Fort Conger. Upon reaching the desolate shoreline of Ellesmere Island, the Greely expedition first glimpsed Fort Conger, a cluster of rudimentary shelters whose quiet presence seemed incongruous against the vast Arctic emptiness, hinting at both human perseverance and unexplained isolation. The fort had been previously established as part of the Lady Franklin Bay expedition, yet its simple structures already bore the marks of exposure to relentless weather and shifting ice. As the crew approached, they noted the strange stillness of the area, the way the surrounding snowfields absorbed sound, and how the horizon seemed endless, making the fort appear simultaneously fragile and significant, a lone human outpost in a frozen wilderness that demanded both respect and vigilance. The surrounding landscape unfolded in stark contrasts. Jagged ice cliffs rose from narrow fjords, while snowfields stretched endlessly beneath a sky that shifted abruptly from pale gold to icy grey, instilling both awe and a subtle unease among the crew. Crevasses and pressure ridges threaded through the frozen terrain, challenging the men's sense of scale and proportion, and the light played tricks across the ice, creating shapes that suggested movement where there was none. Even in moments of relative calm, the Arctic revealed itself as a place governed by forces beyond comprehension, where ordinary navigation and human expectations could be rendered meaningless by shifting snow and the ever-changing play of shadow and reflection. Crews worked tirelessly to establish living quarters, scientific stations and supply caches, carefully organising instruments for astronomical, meteorological and magnetic observations, all while adjusting to the relentless cold and the disorienting monotony of the polar environment. Tents were erected, tools catalogued, and stations positioned to measure phenomena with the utmost precision, reflecting the expedition's dual goal of survival and knowledge gathering. Men moved methodically through their tasks, their routines rigid yet necessary, with each observation meticulously recorded in journals. Even in the mundane labour of daily maintenance, there was an underlying tension, a sense that every step could bring an encounter with unexpected danger or another mystery waiting to reveal itself in the stark, frozen surroundings. Within days, curious anomalies began to surface. Sledges left by previous expeditions had shifted inexplicably, and footprints, sometimes human, sometimes indiscernible, hinted at prior activity that defied explanation in the remote uninhabited region. The crew meticulously compared their own tracks to these signs, attempting to determine if they were natural distortions, animal interference, or remnants of human presence long forgotten. Even minor observations, such as a displaced supply box or a small drift of snow covering a previously clear path, were recorded with precise detail, as the men sensed that these seemingly minor irregularities hinted at forces operating beyond immediate understanding. Encounters with local wildlife offered further strangeness, as polar bears approached with uncharacteristic caution. Arctic foxes displayed unusual boldness near the fort, and birds circled in patterns the crew could neither predict nor record adequately. Observers noted that some animals seemed unusually aware of the fort's human activity, retreating or pausing in ways that implied an almost conscious recognition of the men's presence. These behavioural anomalies, though subtle, heightened the sense that the environment was interacting with them in unpredictable ways, adding to the expedition's growing awareness that the Arctic was not merely a backdrop but a participant in the narrative of observation and discovery. Scattered remnants of supplies and abandoned artefacts arrived with drifting ice, sometimes in unlikely locations, creating a subtle puzzle of prior journeys that suggested both human presence and the unpredictable whims of the Arctic currents. Pieces of wood, fragments of sledges, and containers previously left by explorers appeared far from expected points, confounding mapping efforts and prompting the men to speculate on the behaviour of ice flows. These materials were carefully catalogued, not only for practical reasons, but as part of a broader attempt to understand the Arctic's hidden mechanisms, which seemed to displace objects without pattern or apparent explanation, leaving the crew both fascinated and uneasy. The atmosphere itself seemed to play tricks. Sudden storms emerged from clear skies, while strange refractions and shimmering ice patterns confused depth perception, leaving observers questioning the reliability of their own senses as well as their instruments. The interplay of light, temperature, and reflective surfaces created illusions that made cliffs appear closer or further than they were, and snowfields occasionally seemed to move in waves under shifting winds. Observers recorded these phenomena with meticulous attention, noting times, directions, and conditions, yet no amount of data could fully explain the strange visual and atmospheric effects that consistently challenged their perception of the landscape. Daily measurements of temperature, magnetic declination, and solar position occasionally produced results at odds with expectations, prompting journals to record not only figures, but growing notes of puzzlement and concern over anomalous readings. Magnetic needles deviated without apparent cause, temperatures varied unexpectedly across relatively small distances, and auroral activity occasionally interfered with observations. These anomalies were meticulously noted, each one a reminder that despite the expedition's scientific rigour, the Arctic contained mysteries that resisted full documentation or rational explanation, leaving both observers and later analysts with questions that remain unresolved. Isolation began to weigh heavily on the men, each day blending into the next as the fort's frozen surroundings and the persistent stream of unexplained observations fostered a creeping sense of psychological strain and unease. Even minor mistakes or oversights could be amplified in the vast empty terrain, and the monotony of snow, ice, and wind pressed on morale. Personal journals reveal subtle signs of anxiety and preoccupation, with men noting how shadows seemed to lengthen unnaturally, or how silence itself could feel oppressive, as if the Arctic landscape was actively observing and responding to their presence. Further exploration revealed subtle, unsettling changes in the ice and terrain. Supply caches had shifted overnight, and snowdrifts formed in patterns inconsistent with prevailing winds, adding layers of unexplained phenomena to their daily routines. Observers recorded these changes, sometimes retracing steps only to find the ground altered or objects displaced. While each occurrence had a plausible physical explanation, the frequency and irregularity made the crew question whether larger, unknown forces were influencing the environment around Fort Conger, reinforcing a sense of disquiet that pervaded the camp. Efforts to communicate with resupply ships or neighbouring stations were slow and uncertain, heightening anxiety, as the vastness of the Arctic left little room for error, and every delay amplified the sense that the fort's mysteries might remain unresolved. Messages took weeks to travel, weather interfered with signals, and the crew often relied on limited observations to plan movements or ration supplies. This logistical challenge, combined with ongoing environmental oddities, created an atmosphere in which even the simplest tasks felt shadowed by the unknown, and every plan carried the weight of potential misfortune. Even after returning to more temperate climates, historians and scientists examining Greely's journals noted lingering anomalies, observations of strange ice behaviour, wildlife patterns, and magnetic readings that seemed inexplicable despite careful documentation. These records illustrate that, while the expedition achieved many scientific objectives, there remained aspects of Fort Conger that defied rational explanation, leaving modern scholars intrigued by both the observations themselves and the subtle ways they conveyed the uncertainty experienced by men at the edge of the known world. Taken together, the expedition's meticulous records portrayed a place both rigorously studied and curiously enigmatic, where environmental patterns and human perception collided to create a subtle but persistent aura of the uncanny. Every observation, from displaced sledges to unexpected animal behaviour, contributes to an overall impression of Fort Conger as a site where ordinary rules seemed suspended and where the Arctic revealed a quiet, inscrutable intelligence through its anomalies. The cumulative effect is one of persistent curiosity, a reminder that even well-documented expeditions can leave mysteries that survive the test of time. Though the fort eventually fell quiet, the Arctic winds and ice preserved the peculiar details Greely's men described, leaving behind echoes of mysteries no document could fully record. The Peary expedition's reports of a phantom landmass. As Peary's sledges creaked across the northern ice, the explorers glimpsed a faint rise on the horizon, a shadowy outline that seemed almost solid yet vanished with shifting light, suggesting a landform that might not exist at all. The men paused, squinting against the low winter sun, attempting to reconcile the sight with their charts and prior knowledge of the area. Journals record the moment with both excitement and uncertainty. A potential discovery of new terrain, yet one that could dissolve at any moment under the Arctic's deceptive light. Even the most experienced observers felt the weight of doubt pressing against the thrill of exploration. The Arctic horizon stretched endlessly, a flat expanse that toyed with the eye, while distant icebergs, atmospheric mirages, and shimmering heat waves warped the crew's sense of distance and scale. The vast emptiness amplified small visual anomalies, transforming ordinary snow ridges into apparent cliffs or islands, and ice flows into jagged shorelines. Every subtle shimmer seemed to promise the revelation of hidden land, yet each was fleeting, vanishing as clouds shifted or the sun dipped below the horizon. The men learned quickly that the Arctic did not merely test endurance, it tested the fidelity of perception itself. Instruments and charts became both lifelines and sources of frustration, as compasses wavered under magnetic anomalies and sextants struggled to provide consistent readings in a landscape where nothing appeared stable. Every calculation was tempered by the realization that the environment could render even the most careful measurement unreliable. Peary and his assistants meticulously documented declinations, latitudes, and angles, yet the numbers sometimes conflicted with the visual observations. The tension between empirical data and what the eyes reported deepened the mystery of the elusive shapes on the horizon, and the explorers began to question whether they were witnessing real land or the Arctic's subtle illusions. The first true report of the phantom land came on a crisp morning, when a line of faint peaks rose beyond a frozen inlet, prompting scribbled notes and tense debate over whether the shapes were real or illusions. The peaks were distant, their outlines hazy against the shimmering sky, yet their presence was undeniable enough to provoke cautious excitement. Sketches were made, measurements attempted, and coordinates recorded, though every observer sensed the precariousness of their claim. Even the smallest change in light or angle altered the appearance of the forms, leaving the crew caught between fascination and skepticism. Light played tricks across snow and ice, bending over ridges and reflecting off distant flows in ways that suggested forms, cliffs, or islands where none were charted, confounding both eyes and instruments. Sunlight refracted through layers of ice crystals, creating inverted images and shifting shapes, sometimes giving the impression of elevation where the land was flat. The explorers soon realized that the Arctic's optical illusions were as much a challenge to document as any icebound obstacle, and that perception alone could not be trusted when the horizon offered such deceptive signals. Crew journals filled with sketches and measurements captured these ambiguous shapes with both precision and uncertainty, detailing the tension between recorded observation and the nagging doubt that the land might be imaginary. Notes describe contour lines that changed from day to day, horizon lines that appeared closer in morning light and receded in afternoon, and features that seemed tangible until viewed from another angle. These detailed records reveal a careful attempt to impose order on a fundamentally unstable visual landscape, demonstrating the crew's dedication to documenting the Arctic, even when the evidence could not be verified. On subsequent days, the same vague forms appeared in different locations, sometimes altered in size or shape, reinforcing the sense that the Arctic itself could manipulate perception and challenge belief. Men reported seeing peaks stretch, contract or shift subtly as they traversed the ice, leaving them to wonder whether the shapes were moving, the ice itself changing, or their eyes deceiving them. Each reappearance fueled both curiosity and unease, compelling Peary to record every sighting in hopes that a pattern might emerge, even as uncertainty deepened. Later surveys, conducted by other explorers and modern cartographers, failed to confirm any landmass in the reported locations, deepening the mystery of whether Peary's observations had captured a phantom or a fleeting optical phenomenon. Maps created in Peary's era included the proposed landforms, yet subsequent expeditions could not reconcile these sightings with the verifiable geography. Scholars have debated whether mirages, unusual light conditions, or errors in navigation produced the reports, leaving the phantom land a topic of enduring speculation and fascination for both historians and Arctic enthusiasts. Isolation and relentless monotony lent weight to each sighting, as the explorers' eyes strained under low-light drifting snow and the glare of ice, heightening both anticipation and the possibility of error. Days blended into one another, with each journey across the frozen expanse reinforcing the unreliability of perception and the fragility of certainty. Even routine tasks, surveying snow ridges, measuring distances, or mapping ice flows, became exercises in careful observation, with every shadow, reflection, or shimmer scrutinized for evidence of true land or a mirage conjured by the Arctic itself. Attempts to approach the phantom land proved futile, blocked by thick ice, shifting ridges, and storm-driven snow, each obstacle amplifying the enigma of what could be seen but never reached. Sledges were halted by impassable pressure ridges, sled dogs struggled in crevassed terrain, and blizzards swept across the horizon without warning. These physical barriers underscored the uncertainty of the visual claims, leaving the men with nothing more than fleeting glimpses and measurements that could not resolve the mystery. Every failed approach strengthened both the allure and the frustration of the elusive landforms. Maps and published reports carried the outlines of the phantom land for decades, entering scholarly debate and cartographic speculation, with some scientists cautious, others convinced by Peary's detailed notes. These reports contributed to a sense that the Arctic could harbour secrets that eluded even the most meticulous explorers. The inclusion of these landforms on maps perpetuated both belief and skepticism, leaving a trace of mystery in scientific literature and the imagination of anyone attempting to comprehend the Arctic's vastness. Within the broader history of Arctic exploration, sightings like these were not uncommon, yet few combined precise observation, repeated reports, and the persistent uncertainty that Peary recorded, leaving the phenomenon unresolved. Mirages, optical illusions, and misidentified icebergs have been reported by countless expeditions, yet Peary's journals stand out for their careful attention to detail, multiple witnesses, and consistent recording of ambiguous features. The phantom land thus occupies a liminal space between the real and the imagined, a testament to the Arctic's power to confound even the most methodical observers. The collected observations reveal a landscape where perception, light, and ice conspire to form shapes that resist certainty, leaving explorers to navigate a terrain that seems both tangible and elusive. Despite meticulous notes, sketches, and repeated journeys, the phantom land remained inaccessible and unverified, a reminder that the Arctic could both reveal and conceal, offering glimpses of impossible geography that challenged human understanding. The horizon itself became a stage for doubt and speculation, with every sighting a subtle test of belief against the unyielding reality of ice and light. Beyond the instruments and sketches, the Arctic horizon continues to guard its illusions, hinting at lands that might exist only in the fragile certainty of human perception. The Sannikov land expeditions and the Vanishing Arctic Island. A fleeting shadow on the horizon drew the eyes of Yakov Sannikov and his companions, a phantom outline that shimmered over the frozen expanse and ignited the belief in a hidden island beyond the new Siberian archipelago. The earliest reports, recorded in sparse notes and whispered among hunters, described a land that seemed to hover beyond the ice, appearing solid yet elusive, a form that teased the imagination while defying verification. For decades, these sightings captured the curiosity of explorers, prompting expeditions into some of the harshest and most remote regions of the Arctic, each journey a pursuit of a terrain that may have existed only in the eye of the beholder. Even seasoned men who had traversed Arctic floes for years found their conviction wavering, unsure whether they were witnessing a tangible land or an illusion conjured by ice and atmosphere. Each maneuver of the sledges and boats was dictated by ice that shifted unpredictably, forcing the explorers to read subtle cues in the landscape as though the Arctic itself was resisting their advance. Large floes could wedge themselves against the hulls of vessels, forcing course changes that consumed precious time and supplies. Small ridges of snow and ice were scrutinized for signs of solid ground, while every gust of wind could obscure vision and rearrange the surface entirely. The explorers became attuned to subtle environmental signals, yet the unpredictability of the ice meant that certainty was never guaranteed. At night, the strange glow of moonlight reflecting off the ice added further uncertainty, transforming familiar ridges into otherworldly forms that seemed to shift when observed in passing. Stories whispered by local hunters lent weight to the sightings, recounting a land that appeared at times with sharp cliffs and at others as low ridges dissolving into fog, blurring the line between myth and reality. Indigenous knowledge, passed down through generations, spoke of a land that appeared on the horizon but could vanish without warning, a phenomenon attributed to the Arctic's shifting weather and light conditions. These tales merged with Sannikov's own accounts, forming a narrative that straddled folklore and exploration, challenging those who attempted to reconcile legend with empirical observation. In winter months, when the air shimmered in frozen layers, the horizon itself seemed deceptive, offering glimpses of terrain that would vanish when approached, leaving observers questioning even the most basic assumptions. Eduard Toll, undeterred by tales of vanished terrain, marshalled a team of seasoned explorers and set forth into the labyrinth of ice in search of the elusive landmass, aware that every day could bring revelation or disappointment. The expedition was meticulously prepared, with provisions, sledges and instruments calibrated for Arctic extremes. Each man carried both hope and the understanding that the journey might yield only frustration. Toll's resolve was emblematic of the era's explorers, who pursued knowledge at the edge of endurance, drawn by both scientific curiosity and the allure of the unknown. Encounters with polar bears, frostbitten hands, and blinding snowstorms became regular trials that tested not only physical strength, but the persistence of belief in the unseen land. Currents shifted without warning, and floating ice could wedge against the hulls, compelling the expedition to adjust routes with precision and sometimes abandon planned approaches in the face of mounting danger. Maps were consulted constantly, yet the shifting flows rendered them unreliable. Even experienced sailors and surveyors were forced to interpret subtle changes in the ice to navigate safely. Each deviation from the planned course was a reminder of the Arctic's capriciousness, an environment where human expectation was only rarely matched by reality. Tidal shifts and pressure ridges made it impossible to predict ice movement, often forcing the explorers to retrace paths that had seemed secure only hours before. From time to time, shapes emerged on the horizon, rocky promontories or jagged ridges, but their positions changed depending on light, wind and perspective, confounding even the most attentive observers. Men would pause, squinting against the low sun, sketching outlines that might vanish by midday. The distant forms could suggest cliffs, hills or islands, yet none could be approached or confirmed. These intermittent sightings fueled both excitement and anxiety, for the possibility of discovery was accompanied by the certainty of deception, a delicate balance that governed every observation. Some mornings the explorers debated whether they had glimpsed Sannikov land itself or a mirage cast upon the ice, with outlines that appeared sharper than any iceberg or known landform. As suddenly as the island seemed to appear, it could dissolve into haze or vanish behind a ridge of drifting ice, leaving explorers questioning whether their eyes had been deceived by the Arctic's subtle manipulations. Optical phenomena, mirages and atmospheric refractions all contributed to the sense of instability. Every repetition of the sighting was followed by scrutiny, debate and doubt. The island existed on the threshold of reality, perceived but never fully tangible, a challenge to both the explorers' instruments and their trust in their own senses. The fleeting glimpses were accompanied by an almost audible silence, broken only by the wind across the ice, which seemed to mock the men's efforts to pin the land down. Attempts to reach or circumnavigate the reported landmass repeatedly ended in frustration, thwarted by storms, impassable flows, or disorienting whiteouts that masked any approach with impenetrable glare. Sledges were forced back by ridges of packed ice, boats could not break through dense floes, visibility dropped suddenly in drifting snow. Each failure reinforced the notion that Sannikov land was not merely distant, but perhaps fundamentally inaccessible, a phantom whose existence could only be glimpsed at the margins of experience and endurance. Even as the men retreated, they felt the tension between what they had seen and what could be confirmed, a gnawing uncertainty that lingered long after the ice had passed. Each blizzard or sudden frost reinforced both the peril and the allure of Sannikov land, as men trudged through snowdrifts and temperatures that sapped strength while demanding unwavering attention to the horizon. The physical toll of the Arctic was compounded by the psychological strain of chasing a land that might vanish as quickly as it appeared. Men reported seeing shapes in the distance that defied logic, leaving journals filled with both observation and speculation. The environment demanded vigilance, patience and endurance, testing every facet of human resilience. Some evenings, as the explorers huddled in tents, they whispered of shapes that had flickered in the frost or vanished over the ice, unable to reconcile memory with sight. Detailed journals captured every fleeting sighting with sketches, coordinate notes and careful descriptions, yet the entries often conveyed uncertainty alongside meticulous observation. Toll's meticulous records offer a window into the tension between hope and doubt, with every line illustrating the explorer's attempt to reconcile fleeting visual evidence with the unyielding reality of ice and sky. These records have allowed modern historians to trace the pursuit, revealing both the limits of human observation in extreme environments and the compelling draw of an unverified discovery. The combination of written word, measurement and personal testimony lent the Phantom Island a weight that extended far beyond the Arctic itself. Later expeditions and modern mapping efforts found no trace of the island in the locations recorded, intensifying the mystery and leaving the land suspended between history, legend and optical illusion. Geographical surveys of the region have consistently failed to identify solid ground where Sannikov and Toll reported it, suggesting that the phenomenon may have been a combination of misperception, unusual ice formations, and atmospheric effects. Yet the repeated reports by experienced explorers maintain a tension between skepticism and possibility, a lingering question that refuses simple resolution. Even today, researchers debate whether the land had ever been tangible or existed only in the conjunction of light, ice, and human expectation. The island's story persisted in Arctic lore, whispered among explorers and locals alike, a spectral presence that inspired both hope and skepticism for anyone venturing north. It became a symbol of the Arctic's deceptive beauty, a reminder that the far north could conceal as much as it revealed. Each tale of sighting, disappearance, and near approach contributed to the mythos of Sannikov land, allowing it to endure as both a historical pursuit and a narrative of mystery that transcends geography. Its memory lives in journals, maps, and the imaginations of all who confront the relentless shifting ice. The chronicles of these searches reveal an Arctic where even the firmest observation is vulnerable to deception, a landscape in which land can appear, vanish, and haunt the imagination of all who dare to pursue it. Explorers, cartographers, and scholars are united in their recognition that the Arctic's extremes test perception, endurance, and judgment alike, creating moments where legend and reality merge in the fragile clarity of a fleeting sighting. The stories of those who pursued Sannikov land continue to echo in the silence of the north, where ice and light conspire to hide what may or may not exist. Out past the shifting ice and vanishing horizons, Sannikov land may persist, a phantom revealed only to those willing to chase the Arctic's elusive truths. The Zhokhov Island Expedition's ancient Arctic settlement. The first glimpse of carved bones and polished stone scattered across the tundra startled the archaeologists, revealing that Zhokhov Island had once been home to humans in a landscape now inhospitable to life. The discovery, made during a methodical survey of the New Siberian Islands, immediately challenged assumptions about the limits of prehistoric Arctic habitation. Each artifact seemed to speak of lives lived far from the temperate zones more typically associated with early settlements, suggesting ingenuity, resilience, and an intimate knowledge of one of the most extreme environments on the planet. The team felt the tension between astonishment and the weight of responsibility, knowing that every step across the ice might disturb evidence thousands of years old. A pale sun hung low above the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the uneven ice, adding an eerie stillness to the landscape. Each artifact told a story of survival, from meticulously crafted tools for hunting reindeer to delicate implements suggesting tasks that required patience and skill far from the temperate zones of early human settlements. Knives, scrapers, and harpoons were etched with wear patterns that hinted at repeated, careful use, a testament to human adaptation in an environment that allowed no waste or error. Even the smallest items, a carved bone tip or a fragment of ivory, suggested creativity and intelligence, evidence that life on Zhokhov Island was both organised and purposeful, far beyond mere subsistence. The faint scratch marks and polish on these tools seemed almost deliberate, as if their makers had anticipated that centuries later strangers would scrutinise them under the cold Arctic light. Radiocarbon dating placed the site over 7,000 years in the past, yet the sophistication of the findings suggested knowledge and adaptation that seemed almost impossible given the extreme northern latitude. The results defied easy comparison to contemporary settlements elsewhere in Siberia, indicating a population capable of surviving prolonged winters, hunting in near-total darkness, and navigating treacherous frozen seas. Scholars and archaeologists marvelled at the precision and consistency of the tools, imagining the painstaking efforts required to create them under such unforgiving conditions. Even the wind-whipped ice surrounding the island seemed to echo the skill required to endure in such isolation, amplifying the sense of wonder. Bitter winds and frozen ground surrounded the settlement, yet its remnants hinted at deliberate organisation, as if each tent ring and animal corral had been arranged with an understanding of the land's perilous rhythm. Small depressions marked living spaces, carefully positioned for protection from the wind, while larger cleared areas suggested spaces for communal activities and preparation of food. The traces of hearths and discarded bones reflected both routine and survival strategy, offering insight into daily life in a world that would challenge modern explorers even with contemporary gear. In some areas, frost heave had displaced stones and artifacts, hinting at the constant battle between human ingenuity and nature's slow reclamation. Unexpected discoveries, such as bone harpoons and evidence of long-range trading contacts, suggested that these people may have traversed vast distances or maintained connections with distant communities, deepening the mystery of their capabilities. Ivory fragments resembling materials from southern regions hinted at journeys across frozen expanses or exchanges with groups inhabiting lower latitudes. Each find provoked questions about social networks, the extent of human movement in the Arctic, and how information or materials might have circulated among communities separated by hundreds of miles of ice. The idea that these humans may have perceived the world far beyond the immediate horizon lent an almost haunting quality to the artifacts. The expedition moved carefully, uncovering layers of compacted ice and soil, revealing one artifact at a time, with each finding raising as many questions as it answered about life in this frozen wilderness. The meticulous work involved scraping away centuries of accumulation, documenting each fragment with photographs and sketches. Even the act of discovery felt provisional, as if the Arctic landscape could erase the traces at any moment, leaving the archaeologist to wrestle with the delicate balance between revelation and loss. The rhythmic crunch of boots on frost-hardened soil echoed across the barren expanse, a stark reminder of how temporary human presence remains in contrast to millennia of ice. Circular depressions in the earth hinted at the former dwellings of families, while clusters of animal bones suggested structured hunting and domestication practices, pointing to a society both resilient and methodical. The placement of these depressions revealed a conscious spatial awareness, suggesting that survival depended not only on physical tools, but on careful planning and shared knowledge. Reindeer antlers, used in both hunting and construction, bear marks of wear and repair, indicating long-term utilization and a deep understanding of the available resources. Even the tiniest fragments, carefully catalogued, seem to vibrate with silent testimony to ingenuity born of necessity. Storms and shifting ice constantly threatened to erase the fragile traces of this settlement, reminding the explorers that, even millennia later, the Arctic continued to assert its dominance over human ambition. Strong gusts swept across the island, scattering snow over excavation sites and briefly obscuring evidence beneath layers of frost. Each day the team had to reassess their work and re-establish markers, as though the Arctic itself was intent on preserving the secrecy of those who had once lived there. The occasional cracking of the distant ice floes added a subtle but constant tension, a reminder of the precariousness of both past and present presence on this remote land. Certain tools and implements puzzled the team. They were unlike those found elsewhere in Siberia, leaving open questions about innovation, adaptation, and the origins of the people who'd occupied the island. Some bone and ivory objects displayed craftsmanship not documented in other Arctic sites, suggesting either isolated development or unknown cultural connections. These anomalies heightened the sense of mystery, as if Zhokhov's inhabitants had achieved a level of ingenuity that vanished with them, leaving only enigmatic traces for modern researchers to interpret. The precise scoring on some implements hinted at skill that bordered on artistry, challenging assumptions about prehistoric communities in the high Arctic. The juxtaposition of human ingenuity and the Arctic's harshness created a tension that pervaded every dig, as if the land itself was guarding its secrets while simultaneously whispering glimpses of its history. While examining discarded fragments and arranging them into coherent narratives, the team could almost imagine the rhythms of life. The movement of sled dogs, the preparation of meals, and the cautious vigilance required to survive. Each layer of soil seemed to pulse with silent testimony, the past pressing lightly against the present, reminding the archaeologist that they were only temporary custodians of a vanished world. Snow swirled around their feet as if echoing centuries-old footsteps long vanished. Scientific analysis revealed dietary habits, seasonal movements, and resource management, but even these findings could not illuminate the full story of why humans had chosen to inhabit such an extreme environment. Remains of fish, reindeer, and seabirds indicated a diverse and adaptive diet, while evidence of sled dog use pointed to sophisticated mobility strategies. Yet the fundamental questions persisted. Why had people chosen this isolated outpost? And how had they endured centuries of extreme cold, long winters, and near-constant ice? Modern parallels could scarcely convey the isolation these early humans faced, nor the courage required to carve a life from such unyielding terrain. Despite meticulous excavation and observation, the ultimate fate of Zhokhov's inhabitants remained unknown, their disappearance leaving behind a puzzle as chilling as the icy winds that swept across the island. Natural erosion, climatic shifts, or perhaps migration may have contributed to the settlement's abandonment, but no definitive answer exists. What end came to these hardy pioneers is lost to time, leaving modern observers to piece together hints from scattered tools, remnants of dwellings, and frozen food stores. Some fragments suggest sudden evacuation or gradual disappearance, but certainty remains forever out of reach. The settlement's traces endure in the silent earth, a testament to resilience and ingenuity, yet each artifact carries the weight of questions that continue to elude explanation. teasing every observer who dares to study them. Even after thorough documentation, each fragment of bone, ivory or stone seemed to demand further investigation, drawing the imagination toward possibilities beyond what the evidence could conclusively reveal. The island's frozen landscape framed these questions, its stark beauty accentuating the tension between revelation and mystery. The wind carried a faint hollow whistle across ridges, a sound almost like a memory of the vanished inhabitants themselves. Even as the explorers departed, Zhokhov Island seemed to hold its breath, guarding the secrets of a vanished people beneath its eternal frost. The Toll expedition that vanished, searching for Sannikov land. The expedition set out under a pale winter sun, carrying hopes and supplies to a place few had ever glimpsed, yet the promise of discovery seemed to shrink beneath the vast, unbroken Arctic sky. Led by Baron Edward Toll, the team aimed to reach the elusive Sannikov land, a phantom island reported by earlier explorers but never confirmed. The journey immediately demanded precision and courage, for the new Siberian islands offered only shifting ice, biting winds and terrain that punished every misstep. Even in these first days, the explorers felt the weight of the unknown pressing against them, the Arctic stretching in all directions, silent and unyielding. The men often paused to watch the distant horizon, hoping for even a fleeting glimpse of land that might confirm the legends, but each attempt returned only more emptiness, a reminder of nature's dominance. Drifting ice and endless snow stretched in every direction, testing the endurance of men and dogs alike, each day bringing a subtle reminder of the landscape's merciless indifference. Sea ice cracked beneath sledges, snowdrifts blocked pathways, and every camp required careful preparation to protect both supplies and lives. The monotony of white horizons amplified the psychological strain, with each frozen vista resembling the last, and the boundary between days blurred beneath the low, pale sun. Even the simplest tasks, lighting a stove, melting ice, preparing food, required vigilance, for mistakes in the Arctic could be fatal, and the margin for error was vanishingly small. Nights offered no relief. The wind howled across the ice, rattling tent poles and sending icy needles through exposed layers, a constant reminder of the environment's hostility. Reports of a mysterious land beyond the horizon had circulated for decades, whispered by whalers, hunters, and the indigenous peoples, drawing Toll and his companions into a realm of speculation and legend. Some claimed to have glimpsed a dark outline against the sky, a mass that appeared and disappeared with the shifting light. Maps included Sannikov land as a dotted suggestion, a phantom marked by hope rather than certainty. The allure of the unknown compelled Toll to pursue it, despite warnings from seasoned explorers that Arctic illusions could be treacherous, leading entire expeditions astray. The men carried journals filled with notes and sketches, recording every fleeting shadow, every distortion in the horizon, aware that the Arctic often blurred reality in ways no human eye could fully trust. Navigation proved treacherous, with shifting sea ice and hidden leads forcing the expedition to adjust course daily, each wrong turn threatening food supplies and survival. Compass readings fluctuated under the Arctic's magnetic anomalies, and fog concealed dangers lurking in frozen channels. The team's meticulous charts became unreliable almost immediately, leaving them to rely on instinct, observation, and local knowledge. Each decision held the weight of life and death, for miscalculations could lead to frostbite, starvation, or being stranded on drifting ice floes with no hope of rescue. Even the movement of clouds above could deceive the eye, casting shadows that resembled ridges of land, forcing constant vigilance and recalibration. Mirages shimmered across the horizon, faint forms of what might have been land flickering in and out of view, leaving the explorers questioning both reality and their own senses. Icebergs loomed like ghostly towers, their reflections twisting in the thin air, while distant ridges could vanish with a shift in wind or temperature. Toll recorded these phenomena with careful detail, noting their ephemeral nature and the way they seemed to taunt the human eye. Every glimpse promised discovery yet delivered only uncertainty, reinforcing the thin line between observation and imagination in the Arctic's deceptive light. Even the most experienced members felt a peculiar unease, sensing shapes that were neither solid nor illusory, as if the ice itself mocked human perception. At times, individuals were delayed or became separated in the whiteout, and the sparse records suggest a growing tension and anxiety that never fully dissipated as the expedition pressed northward. Signals were difficult to see across the frozen plains, and even experienced members struggled to maintain orientation. Communication relied on shouted words carried by the wind or markers in the snow, both easily lost or obscured. The dangers of isolation multiplied, for a single misstep could leave a man exposed to frostbite, hypothermia, or drift away from the main party, swallowed silently by the endless white. The crew's journals hint at moments of silent dread, where every sound, creaking ice, shifting snow, was magnified into a potential threat. Cold and isolation weighed on the crew as relentlessly as the ice itself, creating mental fatigue that blurred the line between perception and imagination in the unending Arctic monotony. Long hours of darkness and relentless wind pressed upon the mind, eroding certainty and inflating anxiety. Sleep was fitful, disturbed by creaking ice and the occasional groan of distant glaciers. Even the strongest members felt the strain of prolonged vigilance, for in the Arctic, one lapse could have irreversible consequences. The psychological toll mirrored the physical, leaving an atmosphere thick with quiet tension, each man aware of the precarious balance between survival and disappearance. Occasionally whispers of hallucinations and strange sounds were recorded, perhaps echoes of fatigue or perhaps the Arctic speaking in its own language. Repeated searches for Sannikov land brought only fleeting glimpses or shifting shapes in the ice, and each day's disappointment seemed to stretch longer than the last, testing hope against reason. Toll and his companions pressed onward, yet the horizon yielded nothing concrete, leaving the land an ephemeral suggestion, visible only to the eye's fleeting imagination. Ice ridges shifted, obscuring trails, and the promised island remained elusive. These repeated failures to confirm its existence heightened both suspense and frustration, underscoring the vastness and indifference of the Arctic environment. Even when distant objects were glimpsed, their scale and permanence could not be verified, leaving the explorers trapped between hope and the Arctic's merciless illusion. Later expeditions uncovered scattered remnants, tents abandoned in haste, sled fragments and personal items buried beneath snow, but no conclusive evidence explained the final path of Toll and his men. These fragments spoke of careful planning undone by forces beyond human control. Journals retrieved from partial remains hinted at hardship, determination, and despair, yet offered no certainty regarding the crew's ultimate fate. Every artifact seemed to ask a question rather than answer one, suggesting a story interrupted and preserved only in fragments against the frozen landscape. Some items, carefully catalogued, revealed subtle hints of routes taken, yet even these failed to illuminate the expedition's final days with clarity. Questions linger over the disappearance, whether they succumbed to the elements, became lost in drifting ice, or met some other fate remains a puzzle that continues to evade resolution. The Arctic's frozen expanses concealed tracks and trails that might have told their story. Observers could only trace the faintest outlines of movement across ice and snow, leaving the remainder to conjecture. Even the most experienced analysts cannot reconstruct the final days with certainty, reinforcing the enigma that has haunted historians and explorers for over a century. Each unanswered question underscores the fragile boundary between human ambition and nature's indifferent vastness. The story of the expedition entered Arctic lore as a cautionary tale of ambition and myth, a reminder that the icy frontier could swallow even the most determined explorers without a trace. Maps would continue to mark Sannikov land for decades, fueled as much by legend as observation, and each new expedition faced the same tension between hope and the unforgiving reality of icebound seas. The Toll expedition became emblematic of the Arctic's ability to challenge human perception, resilience, and imagination, leaving an indelible mark on the history of polar exploration. Even now, echoes of the journey linger in the records, in half-frozen letters and reports, whispering a story never fully told. Modern historians and researchers can reconstruct fragments of the journey, yet every analysis only deepens the mystery, highlighting the limits of knowledge in a region that guards its secrets jealously. Reports from scientific surveys and archival research illuminate preparation, supply routes, and possible decisions, yet none can explain the final disappearance. The Arctic preserves its truths selectively, offering glimpses and fragmentary evidence, and in that selectivity lies the enduring fascination and unease surrounding the Toll expedition. Each unanswered question underscores both human curiosity and vulnerability in the far north. As the ice continues to shift and the winds carry whispers of old journeys, the Toll expedition remains a stark emblem of human audacity, confronting the unyielding, indifferent Arctic. The Stephenson expedition's strange survival on Wrangel Island. The wind carried a bitter metallic tang across the frozen coast as Stephenson's team stepped onto Wrangel Island, immediately aware that this remote expanse offered both promise and peril in equal measure. Vilhjalmur Stephenson, seasoned in Arctic exploration, had prepared meticulously, but even he could not anticipate the strangeness that awaited. The team's boats cut through slushy waters, leaving behind trails that were quickly swallowed by the encroaching ice. Each step on the tundra reminded the men that nature here followed rules of its own making, indifferent to human expectation. Early observations hinted at survival challenges far beyond simple endurance, and the Arctic itself seemed to whisper a warning in the rhythm of wind across the barren shoreline. Jagged cliffs and snow-covered ridges rose like silent sentinels around the camp, each slope concealing hidden ice crevasses that could swallow a man in a heartbeat. The team discovered that even the smallest miscalculation in placement or footing could result in sudden catastrophe. Observing the ice patterns, Stephenson noted anomalies in colour and thickness that suggested unusual currents beneath the frozen surface. The island's topography constantly shifted, with ice blocks moving unpredictably, forcing the explorers to navigate with a mixture of skill, intuition, and caution. Snowdrifts, layered over unseen crevices, became treacherous traps, and the men learned to probe every path with poles before advancing. Even familiar landmarks transformed under shifting weather, leaving the team perpetually disoriented. Rations were calculated with painstaking precision, yet even the most meticulous planning could not account for the Arctic's relentless unpredictability, which tested both stomach and morale. Supplies dwindled faster than expected due to frost damage and accidental spillage, forcing improvisation in both meals and storage. The men relied on preserved meats, pemmican, and tinned goods, supplemented by fish caught from thin ice openings. Stephenson's knowledge of Inuit survival techniques proved invaluable, guiding the team in extracting nutrients from scarce resources. Fires were kept minimal to conserve fuel, yet each meal became a ritual of endurance and careful measurement. Even the simple act of boiling water carried risk, as miscalculations could drain precious fuel or allow ice to melt inefficiently. Strange echoes across the ice drew the team's attention to distant movements, and curious polar bears watched from afar with a persistence that unsettled even experienced explorers. Stephenson recorded their patterns, noting the animals' intelligence and the subtle ways they seemed to avoid confrontation, while remaining always aware of human presence. Other wildlife behaved in ways the team could not easily explain. Herds of reindeer appeared to vanish suddenly behind ice ridges, and Arctic foxes darted across frozen streams with an almost preternatural caution. The men began to suspect that the island held secrets beyond ordinary observation, a subtle intelligence woven into the environment itself. Observing the horizon for signs of predators became as routine as checking rations or tents, a constant interplay of fear, curiosity, and respect. Fatigue seeped into every task, and the men found themselves counting steps and breaths with a nervous rhythm that underscored how isolation magnified the smallest discomforts. Sleep was fitful, interrupted by storms that battered their makeshift shelters and forced them to rise repeatedly to secure supplies. Frostbite and sore muscles became daily threats, while exhaustion blurred the line between perception and reality. Some recorded fleeting illusions, a shifting shadow, the reflection of distant ice in the twilight, that heightened anxiety and fed speculation. Each day the men became increasingly aware that the Arctic imposed a subtle psychological pressure, one that tested patience and concentration even more than raw physical endurance. Improvised shelters of driftwood and snow blocks became refuges against the blizzards, and the crew discovered inventive methods to melt ice and trap rainwater that seemed almost improbable in such a hostile place. Snow was carefully shaped to insulate tents, while ice blocks were arranged to form windbreaks that could withstand sudden gusts. Pools of melted ice were stored in hides and containers, providing a precious source of fresh water when streams were frozen solid. Stephenson encouraged innovation, allowing men to experiment with various methods of heating and cooking, turning necessity into an ongoing challenge. Every small improvement was celebrated, for even modest gains meant an extension of life on the unforgiving island. Sudden storms would appear without warning, their roaring winds reshaping the ice overnight and forcing the expedition to reconsider each route and supply cache with urgency. The men were forced to abandon planned paths and seek temporary refuge, often scrambling over newly formed ridges and crevices that had not existed hours earlier. The island's climate showed no mercy. Wind-driven snow could conceal treacherous cracks or erase footprints in minutes, erasing traces of progress. Stephenson learned to read the clouds, the direction of drifting ice, and subtle colour changes in the horizon, as these signs sometimes foretold violent weather. Even the most routine journey across the tundra became a test of adaptability and awareness. Quiet stretches of tundra brought a peculiar stillness, where even the slightest sound, a cracking ice sheet or distant animal call, seemed amplified and laden with hidden meaning. The crew sometimes paused in awe, sensing that the Arctic held its own rhythms and logic, incomprehensible to those who had not spent weeks immersed in it. Echoes travelled for miles, and a single footfall could sound like a warning or a presence nearby. The men developed an acute sensitivity to these cues, relying on intuition and long experience to navigate the deceptive landscape. Such stillness was both beautiful and unsettling, highlighting the thin divide between life and danger in an environment that refused to reveal itself fully. Stephenson carefully noted the behaviours of Arctic foxes and walruses, observing patterns that suggested intelligence and caution beyond ordinary expectation, as if the animals were aware of the men's fragile presence. Occasionally he recorded phenomena that seemed inexplicable, sudden gatherings of animals that dispersed without apparent cause or tracks that led nowhere. These observations were meticulously logged, a mixture of natural science and witness to the eerie order of the island. Over time, the team realised that survival depended as much on understanding wildlife behaviour as on rationing supplies or building shelters. Even the smallest irregularities could hint at danger or opportunity, underscoring the delicate balance between humans and the Arctic. Narrow escapes from collapsing ice floes or hidden snowdrifts reinforced the sense that survival here was contingent not only on skill, but on constant vigilance and an intuitive reading of the land. Several members recounted moments when a misstep would have plunged them into freezing waters or jagged crevasses, their lives spared only by alert companions. Every crossing demanded careful planning, and yet, despite their caution, the Arctic seemed to conspire with chance, creating situations where even expertise offered no guarantee. Each narrowly avoided disaster intensified both awe and anxiety, deepening the narrative of strange survival that would later define Stephenson's expedition. Journal entries chronicled every anomaly, from strange shadows at dawn to sudden fog banks, that seemed to hint at forces within the Arctic beyond human comprehension. Observers wrote of ice formations that shifted overnight, leaving puzzling patterns that defied explanation. Reflections in frozen lakes distorted reality, and distant sounds often seemed amplified or misplaced, as though carried by invisible currents. Stephenson treated these anomalies with curiosity rather than superstition, but he also recognised the profound uncertainty of a place where human perception could be easily deceived. Each entry reinforced the sense that survival was not merely physical but also psychological, a matter of interpreting the Arctic's subtle cues correctly. Later explorers would reference Stephenson's records as both guidance and warning, recognising that the Arctic demanded respect, patience, and a willingness to embrace uncertainty in ways few could imagine. The expedition's meticulous documentation provided insights into daily life, resourcefulness, and the island's environmental oddities. Scholars and adventurers alike would draw lessons about improvisation, endurance, and observation, yet the mystery of certain phenomena, phantom sounds, shifting ice, unexplained animal behaviours, remained unsolved. Wrangel Island continued to captivate explorers, and Stephenson's experiences highlighted the intersection of human resilience and Arctic strangeness. As the expedition pressed onward, The island's endless horizon seemed to pulse with quiet unpredictability, a reminder that even survival carried its own haunting mysteries. Winds sculpted the ice, and the position of the sun transformed the terrain in subtle ways that challenged navigation. Shadows could appear to move of their own accord, and distant shapes alternated between rock, ice, and phantom formations. The men adapted, recording these observations carefully, but no amount of preparation could fully shield them from the island's mercurial moods. Each day survived was a testament to human ingenuity, and a reminder that the Arctic retained secrets beyond immediate comprehension. Though every member returned from Wrangel Island alive, the strange phenomena they encountered lingered in their memories, leaving questions that the Arctic itself seemed determined to keep unanswered. The Soviet ice drift stations and their mysterious radio signals. Strange crackles over the radio first caught the attention of the station operators, signalling that something inexplicable was weaving through the frequencies of the Arctic. These transmissions appeared at odd intervals, brief and intermittent, yet their presence was unmistakable, drawing both curiosity and unease among the men tasked with monitoring the harsh, drifting ice. At first, the signals were dismissed as interference from distant storms or equipment anomalies, but as they continued to repeat, their consistency suggested an origin that no one could identify, a presence that was neither entirely natural nor fully technological. Small details in the pitch and rhythm hinted at a hidden pattern, but every attempt to trace it was confounded by the vast emptiness surrounding the stations. Anxiety spread quietly among the crew as engineers attempted to determine whether the signals were natural interference or the product of an unknown source. Instruments were recalibrated, antennas repositioned, and power sources meticulously examined, but nothing in the logbooks or technical manuals could explain why the transmissions persisted with such clarity. The men shared furtive glances and whispered theories, each silently measuring their own apprehension against the impossible, while the unbroken monotony of Arctic life magnified every crackle and beep from the radios. The longer the signals persisted, the more the men began to question whether isolation itself was warping perception, or if the phenomenon was genuinely external. Routines that had once felt monotonous became tense exercises in vigilance, as every ping or burst of static drew scrutiny from alert eyes and ears. Meals, equipment checks, and scientific experiments were performed with an almost obsessive attention, each action punctuated by the possibility that another anomaly might emerge. Even casual conversation slowed, as the men felt the quiet weight of the unseen frequencies pressing against the thin walls of their shelters, a constant reminder that the Arctic could harbour phenomena beyond comprehension. Journals were kept with meticulous detail, often noting the smallest deviation in radio tone or interference, as if documenting every nuance could somehow bring understanding. The transmissions were inconsistent, sometimes vanishing for hours, only to return with a clarity that defied the limitations of the aging equipment. Operators noted subtle fluctuations in tone, amplitude, and duration that seemed intentional, as though the ice itself carried signals structured with purpose. Logs recorded each appearance and disappearance, yet each entry deepened the enigma, creating a pattern that was nearly perceptible but never fully revealed. Some days the transmissions would synchronize with minor mechanical vibrations or the hum of generators, but the correlation was never perfect, leaving observers unsure whether they were witnessing causation or coincidence. Personnel speculated in hushed tones, weighing explanations ranging from solar activity and atmospheric anomalies to phenomena beyond contemporary scientific understanding. Some believed the signals were reflections from distant ionospheric currents, others suspected hidden currents within the drifting ice flows, and a few quietly considered that the Arctic itself might be communicating in a language humanity could not yet decode. These whispered theories, recorded only in private notes and fleeting conversation, added a layer of human uncertainty to the technical mystery. The interplay of fear and fascination became a subtle force in itself, shaping behaviour and perception without the men fully realising it. Repeated attempts to trace the origin yielded only inconclusive results, leaving technicians frustrated yet strangely compelled to monitor the enigmatic signals. Every directional sweep and triangulation exercise returned results that conflicted with prior readings, producing data that seemed almost deliberately elusive. The operators developed a rhythm of expectation, their attention drawn repeatedly to the static-filled airwaves, each moment an intersection of routine, anticipation, and the inexplicable. Even as the crew became accustomed to the anomaly, its unpredictable timing ensured that no one ever felt entirely in control, creating a persistent tension that stretched across months. Patterns began to emerge, subtle and irregular, suggesting intelligence or structure, though no discernible code could be deciphered. Repeated pulses, occasional pauses, and alternating frequencies hinted at an organisation that seemed conscious yet remained indecipherable. Analysts reviewed the logs with meticulous care, comparing seasonal variations, weather conditions, and equipment configurations, only to encounter further anomalies that defied straightforward explanation. Some engineers even speculated that the signals could carry multiple layers of meaning, embedded in ways that human senses were not equipped to parse. Communications with other stations were delayed or incomplete, leaving the team isolated with the mystery and amplifying the psychological strain of uncertainty. Reports sent to Moscow often arrived days later, sometimes with gaps in transmission, which made it difficult to corroborate observations or rule out technical interference. The isolation heightened awareness of the unknown, as men relied solely on their instruments and intuition to interpret a phenomenon that appeared at once deliberate and untouchable. It became increasingly clear that the Arctic could conceal not only physical dangers, but enigmas that challenged scientific reasoning itself. Engineers observed that the signals often coincided with shifts in the equipment's behaviour, adding a technical puzzle to an already baffling enigma. Power fluctuations, minor malfunctions, and occasional mechanical resonance seemed to appear alongside the transmissions, yet none could explain why they occurred precisely when the signals reached their peak clarity. These coincidental anomalies reinforced the impression that the Arctic environment and the mysterious transmissions were intertwined in ways beyond human understanding. At times, the equipment would even react in ways that suggested a dialogue, as if the ice and machinery were exchanging signals unknown to the men observing. Internal theories ranged from reflections of ice structures to hidden atmospheric currents, yet none offered a satisfying explanation for the precision and persistence of the broadcasts. Some believed that auroras or geomagnetic activity might amplify or carry the signals across vast distances, while others considered more speculative ideas involving echoes of previous expeditions or residual energy within the ice itself. Each hypothesis was cautiously logged, leaving a trail of possible explanations that still failed to resolve the core mystery. The multiplicity of potential causes deepened both intrigue and frustration, leaving an impression that the phenomenon was intentionally resistant to human analysis. Future missions approached the region cautiously, carrying detailed logs of the phenomenon, knowing that the Arctic's invisible currents could conceal phenomena beyond comprehension. New stations were built with improved monitoring equipment, antennas extended higher, and power systems reinforced, yet the elusive signals continued to evade definitive classification. Reports consistently emphasized the unusual behavior of the radio waves, their irregular timing, and the eerie precision with which they persisted, a combination that left observers with equal measures of wonder and unease. The Arctic, it seemed, was a custodian of secrets far older and more subtle than any human endeavour. Crew members later described the signals as possessing a strange, almost melodic quality, fleeting and ephemeral, leaving impressions that defied recording. Even when playback systems attempted to capture the nuances of the transmissions, operators found that some elements were perceptible only in real time, vanishing when reduced to analog representation. These fleeting moments became personal memories, experiences etched into consciousness rather than into data, intensifying the sense that the Arctic itself was a living and secretive presence. The phenomenon blurred the line between observation and imagination, leaving a lingering tension in every decision and recollection. Even with exhaustive monitoring, the transmissions retained an element of unpredictability, a persistent reminder that human observation had limits against the Arctic's hidden mechanics. No combination of technology, discipline, or methodology could entirely contain or explain the phenomenon. Each signal that came and went left behind unanswered questions, traces of sound that teased comprehension, yet withdrew just beyond grasp, an ongoing enigma that quietly governed the lives of those stationed in the ice. The Arctic, it seemed, had a language of its own, one that could be sensed but never fully interpreted. The stations persisted, and the signals remained recorded only in logs and memory, an enigma the Arctic seemed determined never to fully reveal. The Soviet polar aviation expeditions and the moving islands. From the cockpit of a small twin-engine plane, pilots first glimpsed shapes on the horizon that refused to match any known map or chart. The Arctic sky stretched pale and infinite, and beneath it ice floes and open water combined into a restless mosaic that could deceive even the most experienced eye. Yet these forms seemed different, solid yet ephemeral, their edges shifting as if resisting capture. Pilots documented coordinates, sketched outlines, and photographed what they saw, but each image deepened the enigma. The moving islands, as they would soon be dubbed in internal reports, defied both expectation and explanation, leaving crews caught between astonishment and apprehension. Early reports filtered through Moscow with a mix of fascination and skepticism, challenging official beliefs about the Arctic's static geography. Government scientists and polar authorities scrutinized the logs, questioning the reliability of the sightings while acknowledging the pilot's reputation for precision. Maps were reviewed, charts recalibrated, and yet the sightings could not be dismissed entirely. Each pilot's account carried a consistency that suggested more than imagination or optical illusion, and the phenomenon began to take shape as a puzzle that demanded rigorous inquiry. The Arctic itself, long thought to be charted with precision, was revealing an instability that unsettled both cartographers and explorers alike. Navigation instruments, precise for their era, struggled to reconcile the positions of these elusive formations with expected readings, creating tension at every turn. Compasses wavered, sextants offered inconsistent measurements, and gyro readings sometimes contradicted visual confirmation. Pilots described moments when the instruments indicated one location, while their eyes saw something entirely different, a dissonance that gnawed at confidence in even the most careful calculations. In some cases, the drifting ice beneath the plane moved faster than anticipated, amplifying uncertainty. These technical anomalies compounded the mystery, suggesting that the moving islands might be interacting with natural forces in ways that human observation had yet to grasp. Observers noted that the phantom landmasses appeared and disappeared in irregular cycles, sometimes drifting with uncanny speed across open waters. One moment, a dark silhouette rose above the horizon. The next, it had vanished, leaving only the shimmer of ice and the shadow of clouds. Pilots soon learned that repeated passes could yield entirely different perspectives. What seemed to be a small island in the morning might resemble a larger formation by afternoon, or vanish completely. These irregularities prompted detailed comparisons across multiple flights, with crews recording time, weather, light conditions, and ice movements. Yet the phenomenon resisted any simple pattern or explanation. Flight crews felt a growing unease as repeated sightings left no room for doubt, yet no explanation seemed sufficient to calm their uncertainty. The Arctic, already a realm of extreme isolation and danger, became psychologically complex when ordinary geography no longer applied. Crews spoke quietly of phantoms that appeared without warning, and journals occasionally recorded moments of hesitation when pilots debated whether to approach or retreat. Each decision carried weight, for navigating too close to unknown ice formations could imperil the aircraft, while documenting them risked drawing attention to a mystery that remained officially unconfirmed. Soviet geographers and cartographers attempted to document the phenomenon, comparing aerial observations with limited ground-based reconnaissance to resolve the anomaly. Teams scoured maps, overlaid reports from different expeditions, and attempted triangulation with coastal observations, yet results were contradictory. In some instances, formations recorded from the air corresponded to known icebergs or landmasses. In others, there was no record of any terrain where pilots claimed to have seen it. These inconsistencies highlighted the limits of both human perception and contemporary mapping technology, underscoring the Arctic's stubborn capacity to defy categorization. Theories ranged from massive icebergs concealed beneath snow to atmospheric refractions bending light in impossible ways, but none accounted for the full scope of the sightings. Some scientists proposed that mirages intensified by extreme polar temperatures created illusions of solidity where none existed. Others suggested that drifting pack ice could assume shapes that mimicked islands for brief periods. Even more daring hypotheses speculated on geological shifts or undiscovered land masses, though these lacked corroborative evidence. Each explanation illuminated part of the puzzle while leaving critical questions unanswered, a reminder that in the Arctic, certainty remained elusive. Detailed pilot logs described circumnavigating formations that vanished upon approach, leaving instruments and cameras bewildered by their apparent disappearance. Crews would alter altitude, change headings, and sometimes hover for minutes, only to find the island seemingly dissolve into the horizon. Photographs captured shadows and outlines that hinted at solidity, yet when ground-based surveys followed, nothing remained. The logs conveyed a mix of frustration and awe, emphasizing that the phenomenon was neither wholly illusion nor easily explained. For those aboard, the moving islands were tangible, yet simultaneously untouchable, existing in a liminal space between reality and perception. Attempts to synchronize aerial sightings with surface expeditions often yielded conflicting data, further complicating understanding of the Arctic's hidden dynamics. Ships that sailed to investigate coordinates noted drifting ice, fog banks, or unremarkable terrain, rarely confirming the precise locations reported from above. Weather conditions frequently obscured visibility, and ocean currents shifted ice fields rapidly. Discrepancies between aerial and surface observations created debates among scientists and pilots, fueling both intrigue and frustration. It became clear that the moving islands were not merely geographic anomalies but dynamic phenomena that could only be partially captured in fleeting moments. Advances in aerial photography and radiotelemetry provided fleeting evidence of the islands, yet subsequent flights sometimes revealed nothing at all in the same coordinates. Cameras documented shapes and textures that seemed consistent, while radio transmissions allowed teams to coordinate observations across distance. Still, the Arctic's mutable conditions ensured that even the best technology could not render the phenomenon permanent. Each flight produced a blend of data and mystery, with pilots often questioning whether the islands were fleeting geological forms, optical illusions, or a combination of both. The challenge of capturing these formations became a defining aspect of Soviet polar aviation exploration. Each vanishing formation left behind only fragments of data, teasing researchers with the promise of understanding while maintaining its inscrutable nature. Reports were meticulously catalogued, sketches were compared, and anomalies were plotted, yet the moving islands consistently defied conclusive analysis. Scientists could describe patterns of appearance, note approximate trajectories, and hypothesize causes, but full certainty remained beyond reach. The Arctic's unpredictability, combined with the limitations of mid-20th century technology, ensured that the phenomenon retained its aura of mystery. Each vanished island became a reminder of the region's capacity to elude observation and resist interpretation. Generations of polar aviators would carry forward the legacy of the moving islands, their tales woven into the lore of Soviet exploration and Arctic cartography. Stories passed from pilot to pilot, from expeditions to historians, embedding the phenomenon in the collective imagination of those who flew the polar skies. The moving islands became symbols of both achievement and humility, illustrating the vast, unknowable scale of the Arctic and the limits of human knowledge. Even as technology advanced, the mystery persisted, proving that some enigmas could endure beyond scientific ambition or mapping precision. Even decades later, the Arctic's deceptive geometry continued to challenge assumptions, reminding explorers that the region harboured enigmas beyond observation alone. Studies continued into the late 20th century, with satellite imagery and modern aerial surveys providing new tools, yet many of the phenomena reported by the original pilots remained unconfirmed. Researchers acknowledged that environmental shifts, ice drift, and atmospheric conditions could explain part of the sightings, but the precise nature of the moving islands retained an element of the inexplicable. For those who once navigated these skies, the Arctic was a canvas of illusions, a place where the known and unknown converged in perpetual uncertainty. No map could ever anchor them, and no flight path could predict their course, for the moving islands existed in a realm where the Arctic itself seemed to withhold its secrets. The Nautilus submarine expedition beneath the polar ice. The submarine slipped silently into the shadowed waters of the Arctic, entering a world unseen by any human eyes, where ice shelves hung like suspended ceilings and sunlight barely penetrated the depths. The Nautilus expedition, tasked with probing beneath the polar ice, carried a crew of seasoned submariners and scientists, each aware that their surroundings were not only hostile, but entirely alien, Above, the frozen Arctic stretched endlessly, a barren white surface betraying nothing of the labyrinthine ice caverns and submerged ridges below. Inside the submarine, every sound echoed ominously through metal walls, reminding the crew that they were intruders in a realm untouched for millennia. Even the gentle currents of the Arctic Ocean seemed amplified within the narrow hull, making ordinary navigation a feat of careful attention and constant adjustment. Charts and sonar maps, painstakingly prepared over months of research, provided only a partial picture of what lay ahead, offering guidance in a realm that defied conventional mapping. Each moment beneath the ice carried a dual weight of awe and unease, a realization that human perception was limited in this frozen, submerged wilderness. Yet curiosity drove every action, compelling the crew to push further into the unseen. Gauges hummed with life as the crew adjusted to the strange acoustics of water trapped beneath miles of ice, each sonar ping revealing shadows that refused to behave like familiar underwater terrain. Even routine readings suggested anomalies, jagged forms that appeared and disappeared with each pass, and currents that moved in ways no previous survey had indicated. The crew carefully logged every irregularity, aware that minor miscalculations could leave them trapped under layers of unbroken ice. Instruments, while sophisticated for their time, often offered contradictory data, amplifying a sense that the Arctic beneath was far more dynamic than anyone had imagined. As the submarine pressed forward, tiny vibrations travelled through the hull, the ice above seemingly shifting in rhythm with some unseen force. Each observation demanded immediate attention and careful verification, transforming the expedition into a delicate dance of survival and discovery. Something peculiar emerged in the sonar readings, shapes that seemed to shift position even when the submarine maintained a steady course, hinting at a fluidity beneath the ice that defied understanding. These forms were neither purely geological nor biological, a reality that sparked intense speculation among the crew. Some suggested that drifting ice shelves and underwater currents created optical illusions in the sonar data. Others argued that the readings hinted at uncharted topography, entirely alien to previous expeditions. The shapes were fleeting, appearing for only seconds before dissolving into indistinct echoes, yet their consistency over repeated passes made it clear that something tangible existed below the surface. It was a phenomenon without precedent, blending the tangible with the inexplicable. The officers exchanged wary glances as muffled knocks and groans resonated through the hull, the submarine itself seemingly alive with the Arctic's hidden rhythms. Every creak and vibration was a stark reminder that the environment was unpredictable, that the ice and water above and around them could shift without warning. Conversations were subdued, voices carrying a cautious reverence, as if acknowledging that the Arctic had its own consciousness, and that they were only temporary visitors. Even seasoned submariners, accustomed to deep-sea exploration, felt a growing awareness of being watched by the environment itself, an unseen presence in a place where human senses were almost useless. Cameras captured patterns of dark ridges and unexpected hollows that flickered past in a sequence too precise to be random, yet too fleeting to allow full comprehension. The crew photographed each anomaly meticulously, documenting formations that suggested both deliberate design and natural formation. Ice columns jutted from the ocean floor like frozen spires, while depressions in the seabed hinted at long-lost channels or submerged craters. Each frame raised new questions, adding layers of intrigue to a landscape that refused easy categorization. The photographs, once processed, revealed textures and shadows that often contradicted initial impressions, further deepening the mystery of what truly lay beneath the Arctic ice. Depth gauges occasionally contradicted their visual estimates, forcing the crew to question whether the ice above or the sea below had become an unfamiliar landscape entirely. Readings fluctuated inexplicably, sometimes suggesting abrupt drops or rises in the ocean floor that did not exist on charts. Crew members debated whether unusual salinity levels, temperature gradients, or magnetic anomalies could distort instruments, but no explanation fully accounted for the data. These inconsistencies forced caution at every maneuver, each adjustment in course a negotiation between what instruments reported and what human judgment perceived. In this environment, certainty was ephemeral, and the expedition's discoveries were often accompanied by doubt and hesitation. Arctic seals and shadowy silhouettes of drifting ice punctuated the monotony, each encounter factual but framed by an otherworldly stillness that made the crew hesitate. The animals seemed to glide without concern beneath the ice, unaffected by the vessel intruding upon their world. Moments of contact were fleeting, an occasional glance through portholes or the sonar blip of a passing creature, but they emphasized how alien and independent this environment remained. Even the most mundane observations became uncanny, revealing a world where life and landscape interwove with a rhythm that humans could not easily interpret. Silence dominated this submerged world, broken only by the sonar's intermittent blips and the submarine's faint hum, creating an oppressive atmosphere where every sound seemed amplified. Long stretches of motionless drift brought heightened awareness. Each creak of machinery or subtle water movement was magnified into potential signals of threat or discovery. The crew developed a quiet, watchful rhythm, attuned to minute variations in sound and pressure, as though the Arctic itself was communicating through subtle vibrations. This pervasive quiet reinforced a sense of timelessness, where hours might pass without any observable change, yet with the constant impression that unseen activity persisted beyond human perception. Speculation ran quietly through the cabin as the crew attempted to reconcile anomalies with maps and prior surveys, yet none of their theories fully accounted for the phantom formations. Discussions ranged from geological explanations to theories of previously unrecorded under-ice currents, or even interactions between shifting ice shelves and tidal patterns. No single hypothesis explained the combination of moving shapes, unexpected depth changes, and recurring photographic patterns. This lack of explanation kept curiosity and apprehension tightly interwoven, a reminder that the expedition was not merely mapping terrain, but probing mysteries with no known answers. Pressure warnings and the occasional scrape of ice against the hull reminded them that under the frozen surface, danger was always present, tangible and inescapable. The immense weight of the ice above and the unknown features below made every decision critical, demanding precision in navigation and coordination among crew members. Even minor errors could have catastrophic consequences in this closed, frozen world, and each brush with danger reinforced both the bravery and fragility of those aboard the Nautilus. Certain patterns recurred during repeated passes, yet each appearance was subtly altered, suggesting a landscape in constant, unpredictable motion that resisted documentation. The crew noted the fleeting alignments of ridges and depressions that appeared familiar yet changed when approached, a haunting reminder that the Arctic beneath ice was not static but a dynamic, enigmatic system. These patterns hinted at processes or forces still largely unexplored, leaving the crew with a sense of wonder tempered by uncertainty. As the submarine rose toward the surface, gauges and cameras yielded records that were complete yet incomplete, documenting a world only partially understood. The crew reviewed hours of sonar recordings, photographs, and navigational logs, finding that each set of data raised more questions than answers. The expedition had captured fragments of the Arctic's hidden structure, but the full picture remained beyond reach, tantalizing and evasive. This incomplete knowledge heightened both intrigue and a subtle sense of frustration, as if the Arctic refused to be fully known. Returning to open air, the crew reflected on the expedition's findings, aware that under the ice phenomena lingered beyond observation or explanation. They had ventured into a space few humans had seen and returned with evidence of a realm simultaneously familiar and alien, a place where ordinary rules of perception seemed to bend. Every image and reading suggested a world alive in ways the human mind struggled to grasp, a space where the line between natural formation and strange unknown was perpetually blurred. Even now, the Arctic waters conceal secrets that refuse to surface, as if the ice itself is a gate to a world the human eye was never meant to see. The Norwegian Maud expedition's strange magnetic disturbances. Readings aboard the Maud began to register subtle, inexplicable shifts, and the crew soon realized that the Arctic itself seemed to be rewriting the rules of navigation. What had started as minor deviations in compass bearings gradually took on a rhythm of their own, leaving officers and sailors alike questioning whether the instruments could still be trusted. The vast whiteness of the Arctic, so often predictable in its chill and desolation, now seemed charged with an invisible force that twisted the very sense of direction. Even the most seasoned hands felt the disquiet of uncharted phenomena, their routines disrupted by measurements that refused consistency. Maps and charts, once reliable guides, now appeared almost ceremonial, reminders of human certainty in a world that ignored it. Each day brought new data, meticulously recorded by Amundsen, but the anomalies defied any straightforward explanation. As the Maud pressed further into the polar expanse, the crew confronted a silent, persistent enigma, one that demanded attention yet yielded no answers. Instruments and eyes alike struggled to reconcile the Arctic's serene surface with the hidden currents of disruption below. This invisible dissonance, intangible yet measurable, became the expedition's quiet obsession, a tension threading through every observation. And as they moved onward, the ice itself seemed to conspire with the anomalies, presenting a landscape both familiar and utterly alien. Initial observations revealed compasses swinging unpredictably, sometimes opposing each other, creating a quiet tension that even the most experienced sailors could not dismiss. At first, these swings were subtle, almost imperceptible, easily rationalized as temporary misalignments or magnetic interference from the ship's own metal hull. Yet as the readings persisted, the crew could no longer attribute them to mundane causes. Instruments would diverge at odd moments, sometimes returning to apparent normalcy before veering once again. The phenomenon seemed to defy the natural logic of the Earth's magnetic field, suggesting either hidden local anomalies or perhaps forces entirely unknown. Crew members whispered among themselves, comparing notes and shaking their heads at contradictions that grew more pronounced with every hour spent navigating the frozen expanse. The ice beneath them remained solid, yet the invisible forces above and around cast a pall of uncertainty over each decision. Every charted course became a negotiation between human expectation and polar caprice, a negotiation the Maud could never fully win. Charts once relied upon with confidence seemed almost useless, as the vessel deviated slightly from intended courses despite careful steering. Crewmen adjusted sails and recalibrated compasses, hoping for alignment, but even their most precise maneuvers were betrayed by the Arctic's invisible influence. The deviations were rarely extreme, yet enough to unsettle seasoned navigators and plant seeds of doubt in officers responsible for the expedition's safety. Small errors compounded over time, creating routes that seemed subtly altered, almost as if the ice itself were shifting under the ship's weight. This subtle manipulation of space and direction, imperceptible to casual observation, produced an unease that infiltrated conversations, navigation logs, and even the quiet moments of solitude in the crew's quarters. The Maud moved steadily, yet the distance it covered often seemed misaligned with expectation, a discrepancy that demanded careful attention and constant recalibration. Light refracted across ice and fog, creating illusions that seemed to amplify the magnetic confusion and cast doubt on every perception. Sunlight, low and diffused, gleamed off snow and crystalline surfaces, scattering reflections in ways that made distant ice formations appear closer or further than they were. Fog rolled in intermittently, blending sky and ice into a uniform grey that obscured familiar markers. In such conditions, the line between physical reality and perceptual distortion blurred, leaving the crew to rely on instruments that themselves faltered unpredictably. Optical illusions compounded the magnetic anomalies, intensifying the sense that the Arctic was not merely a frozen landscape, but a living, changing presence with inscrutable tendencies. Every glance out over the horizon became a negotiation between eyes and instruments, both of which could be deceived, sometimes simultaneously. Officers noted discrepancies between repeated readings, and even seasoned scientists hesitated, unsure whether to trust the instruments or their own senses. Calculations were double-checked, theories exchanged and discarded, yet none could adequately account for the subtle but persistent divergences. Maps and compass readings frequently contradicted one another, leaving navigators to decide between evidence and instinct. The repetition of conflicting data challenged the crew's confidence, producing moments of quiet anxiety that mingled with awe at the Arctic's relentless impartiality. Even minor anomalies grew in significance over time, as patterns emerged that hinted at forces at work beyond ordinary comprehension. Over successive days, the anomalies persisted with irregular patterns, alternating between subtle undulations and sudden, more dramatic shifts in magnetic orientation. Sometimes, compasses rotated slowly over hours, producing imperceptible course drift. At other times, readings swung sharply, as though responding to some invisible pulse within the ice. The unpredictable nature of the disturbances prevented the crew from forming reliable expectations, instilling a sense of constant vigilance. These oscillations, though measured and recorded meticulously, retained an enigmatic quality, resisting classification or easy explanation. The Arctic had imposed a rule of uncertainty, reminding those aboard the Maud that mastery over the environment was always provisional. Hypotheses circulated among the crew: geological formations, auroral activity, or perhaps unseen polar currents, but none fully reconciled the dissonance between observation and expectation. Scientists aboard experimented with measurements at varying locations and times, noting subtle correlations that hinted at underlying regularity, yet offered no definitive answers. Solar activity and magnetosphere fluctuations were considered along with local ice thickness and ocean currents, yet these theories accounted only partially for what was observed. Each tentative conclusion was tested, scrutinized, and sometimes discarded, creating a rhythm of anticipation, discovery, and doubt that became the expedition's daily cadence. At moments, compasses would settle briefly into alignment before abruptly diverging again, leaving a rhythm of calm and disruption that unsettled the team. These temporary moments of apparent normalcy were deceptive, giving false reassurance that was immediately contradicted by new swings and deviations. Crew members noted these cycles in logs, attempting to identify triggers or patterns, but each episode reinforced the mystery. The Arctic had woven a pattern that suggested intention, yet it remained invisible, unfathomable, and deeply compelling. Crew members found themselves questioning instinctual judgments, their confidence shaken by forces that could be measured yet never seen. Decisions that once relied on experience were now influenced by the tension between observation and anomaly. Steering a vessel became an act of negotiation with both ice and unseen currents, each movement scrutinized for subtle signs of interference. The ordinary rhythm of work was punctuated by these recurring disturbances, which demanded attention even as their cause remained elusive. Amundsen meticulously recorded each instance, noting the intervals and intensity, yet even his precise data could not resolve the deeper enigma. His notebooks grew dense with figures, observations, and cross-references, documenting anomalies in exacting detail while simultaneously acknowledging the limits of human comprehension. Scientific curiosity and navigational necessity intertwined, producing a tension that defined both the expedition's daily work and its broader significance in Arctic research. Aurora borealis and ice reflections occasionally merged with the anomalies, creating a surreal visual accompaniment to the unseen magnetic turmoil. Colours danced across the ice, refracted light shifted unpredictably, and the combination of atmospheric phenomena with magnetic disturbances produced moments that were at once beautiful and disorienting. The natural spectacle deepened the sense of mystery, reinforcing the crew's perception that the Arctic world operated according to rules they had yet to understand. Even the most rational minds began to speculate about connections between the shifting ice, ocean currents, and these mysterious magnetic pulses. Conversations that once focused solely on navigation expanded to include the possible interactions of environment, unseen forces, and polar dynamics. The anomalies became a lens through which the crew considered the Arctic's larger enigmas, from drifting icebergs to deep, unmapped waters. Each observation contributed to a growing awareness that the region's mysteries were not merely superficial, but embedded in its very structure. As the expedition continued, patterns emerged that suggested order within chaos, yet the underlying cause remained stubbornly elusive. Days of observation and careful logging hinted at cyclical tendencies, yet no single explanation sufficed. The Maud pressed onward, a small human presence confronting the immense, inscrutable Arctic, and each deviation recorded became part of an intricate tapestry of unanswered questions. The Arctic held its invisible hand over the Maud, a force felt in every swing of the compass yet never fully revealed, leaving the crew suspended between measurement and mystery. The High Arctic Meteorite Expeditions of Cape York. The massive iron meteorites of Cape York appeared like silent monoliths, resting amidst the relentless Arctic expanse. Their surfaces, scarred and pitted by eons of exposure, seemed almost alive in the shifting polar light, hinting at a history that stretched far beyond human comprehension. The early expeditions, led in part by Robert Peary, approached these immense objects with both awe and cautious curiosity, aware that the frozen land itself would allow no leniency for error or oversight. Every step toward the meteorites was measured, calculated, yet tinged with a sense that the landscape held secrets even the most experienced explorers could not predict. Snowdrifts and frozen fjords concealed both paths and peril, testing every step the explorers took toward these ancient relics. The terrain offered no familiar markers, and the ice could shift unexpectedly, hiding fissures and treacherous thin spots beneath deceptive snow layers. Supplies had to be rationed carefully, while the crews contended with biting winds that carried the scent of salt and frost across the barren tundra. Even minor mistakes in navigation could spell disaster in a landscape that seemed to stretch endlessly, offering no hint of civilization or reprieve. Reflected sunlight off the metallic surfaces created fleeting glimmers that seemed almost otherworldly against the pale horizon. The meteorites themselves were enormous, some weighing several tons, their sheer density a reminder of the cosmic forces that had deposited them here millennia ago. Crews would pause, momentarily hypnotized by these gleaming forms that seemed both alien and familiar, their cold radiance catching in goggles and frost-covered beards. In that frozen stillness, the boundary between earth and sky felt fragile, as if a shift of perception could expose something previously unseen. Teams strained under ropes and sledges, their labour echoing across the icy plain as the meteorites remained immovable. Each fragment transported demanded coordination, persistence, and the endurance of men already weakened by hunger and cold. The physical effort alone tested human limits, but the psychological weight of hauling objects that had fallen from the cosmos added another dimension of intensity. Every haul required negotiation with both the environment and the strange, almost sacred presence of the iron masses themselves. Inuit guides shared fragmented stories of the fallen iron, their voices carrying generations of oral memory across the tundra. These accounts, sometimes contradictory, sometimes hauntingly precise, spoke of times when the meteorites were venerated, feared, and relied upon for tools and weapons. The explorers listened intently, recognizing that the indigenous knowledge might hold subtle clues about safe approaches, hidden crevasses, or ancient pathways leading closer to the heaviest fragments. In these narratives, the Arctic seemed almost animate, observing the men who dared to approach the alien iron. Even careful measurements occasionally yielded anomalies, hinting at forces or properties yet unexplained by science. Magnetic readings varied unpredictably around the largest masses, puzzling the expedition's scientists and prompting repeated verification. Thermometers and compasses sometimes reacted strangely when brought near, their needles twitching as though sensing something beyond ordinary physics. These inconsistencies lent an added layer of unease to the work, suggesting that the meteorites carried influences still unaccounted for in terrestrial understanding. Arctic winds whipped without warning, scattering instruments and obscuring tracks, leaving explorers at the mercy of the terrain. In one moment, the sun glinted off the ice, revealing the path ahead. In the next, whiteout conditions erased visibility, swallowing sledges and men alike into a blinding void. Even seasoned veterans found themselves disoriented, compelled to rely on intuition and prior experience while navigating a landscape that seemed to conspire against precise calculation. The meteorites, distant yet imposing, became markers of hope and hazard in equal measure. The sheer scale of the meteorites challenged not only logistics, but the imagination, inspiring both reverence and unease. Some measured over 30 feet across, their mass exceeding the capacity of multiple sled teams. As men strained to lever and drag pieces through frozen plains, the enormity of these cosmic remnants forced contemplation of a universe far larger and older than human life, an awareness both humbling and unsettling. The Arctic itself, silent and watchful, magnified the weight of this realization, pressing the explorers into a quiet contemplation of mortality and time. Each recovered fragment carried traces of a cosmic journey, linking the frozen Arctic to a vast universe beyond human reach. Embedded nickel-iron alloys and crystalline formations hinted at high-pressure impacts long before Earth's continents assumed their current shapes. These fragments were not merely geological, they were artifacts of space-time, remnants of an explosive history in which stars, gravity, and cosmic collisions had dictated the iron's ultimate resting place. Handling them, even briefly, connected the explorers to a scale of existence both terrifying and sublime. Winter twilight stretched long and dim, casting the iron forms in shadows that seemed to shift as if alive. The interplay of light and shadow rendered the meteorites mutable, appearing as colossal beasts, alien monoliths, or even doorways to a hidden world, depending on the observer's perspective. Such illusions unsettled the men, reminding them that perception in the Arctic was fragile, easily manipulated by wind, snow, and light. Observers often paused in silence, absorbing the eerie ambiguity of form, unsure whether what they saw was reality or imagination conjured by exhaustion. Tales of previous expeditions circulated quietly among the crews, blending documented fact with whispered conjecture. Accounts of men who had collapsed from cold, fallen into hidden fissures, or become disoriented for days lent a spectre of forewarning to each new journey. Explorers compared notes, sometimes contradicting each other, as subtle details, shadows on ice, magnetic anomalies, or strange sounds were catalogued and debated. These shared experiences reinforced both camaraderie and wariness, creating a psychological atmosphere thick with tension and unspoken questions. Moving the largest pieces required ingenuity, patience, and endurance, testing the limits of human resolve. Simple brute force proved inadequate, forcing the men to engineer complex sled assemblies, leverage systems, and protective scaffolding. Supplies dwindled as days extended into nights, and even modest miscalculations could have catastrophic consequences for both men and meteorites. The Arctic's unforgiving nature combined with the meteorite's alien mass to create a challenge that was logistical, physical, and almost existential in its intensity. Even as crates and sledges were loaded, a sense lingered that some aspect of the meteorites would forever remain unknowable. Scientists could describe composition, mass, and magnetic behavior, yet a subtle enigma persisted, an aura of mystery, a quality that eluded measurement, classification, or comprehension. The men could not deny a profound curiosity mingled with apprehension, a recognition that they were in the presence of forces that had shaped worlds long before human records existed. Under the endless Arctic sky, the Cape York meteorites stood as silent witnesses to both cosmic history and human obsession. The Soviet Yamal expeditions and the giant Arctic craters. The first whispers of the Soviet and later Russian expeditions to the Yamal Peninsula in northern Siberia began with something no explorer expected: enormous craters opening up in the tundra, as if the Arctic itself exhaled violently into the sky. For millennia, this vast sweep of ice-rich permafrost, battered by polar winds and the bitter cold of the Kara Sea, seemed immutable, a land etched by time rather than upheaval. Then, in the summer of 2014, a crater more than 50 meters deep and tens of meters across appeared without warning, a yawning void that invited both awe and dread in equal measure. Scientists would struggle for years to understand what force could sculpt such immense funnels on a landscape once thought placid and permanently frozen. What they discovered and what they could not fully explain would draw repeated expeditions into the heart of Siberia's desolate north, where the answers seemed to lie beneath layers of ice, gas, and ancient earth. Yet even before these dramatic openings appeared, Soviet geologists and permafrost specialists had long studied Yamal's frozen grounds, keenly aware that beneath the tundra lay complex layers of ice, methane hydrates, and decomposed organic material frozen in time. Those earlier investigations catalogued the curious behavior of frost mounds and the dynamics of thawing ground, but none had ever anticipated that the land could explode outward in such violent fashion, ejecting blocks of permafrost hundreds of meters from their source. The early expeditions of the 20th century focused more on understanding the mechanical properties of permafrost and how it could change with seasonal thaw, but by the 21st century, the stakes had dramatically increased as explorers returned to Yamal with new questions and tools not available to their Soviet predecessors. When the first great crater was observed by air in 2014, Russian scientists organized ground and aerial expeditions to investigate the site, descending into the funnel with climbing gear and scientific instruments to collect samples of rock, ice, atmospheric gases, water, and soil. those probes revealed something remarkable. Unusually high concentrations of methane gas collected near the crater's base, suggesting a powerful release of subsurface gases rather than a meteorite impact or other typical cause of large pits in the Earth. The methane levels were far above normal atmospheric composition, hinting at processes deep within the permafrost that few had fully grasped. The measurement of gases and frozen soils became the central puzzle for researchers who ventured into the crater's shadow, seeking to decipher evidence far colder and stranger than any they had encountered in warmer climes. Over the next several years, Soviet-era institutions and their modern successors returned repeatedly to these dramatic features, mapping the crater walls, drilling boreholes, and studying patterns of chemical and physical change. Researchers discovered that many of the craters were spatially associated with what were once large frost mounds or pingo-like features, hills formed over ancient talix, areas of unfrozen ground beneath thaw lakes that had since frozen into thick ice lenses. As these ground ice structures changed, the underlying chambers could trap gas and fluid under pressure, creating conditions that, when released, could propel a cavity outward into the open air. In one case, a 2020 expedition documented the formation of a giant crater named C-17, created between May and June of that year, and used drone photography to construct a three-dimensional model of the void left behind. The deeper scientists probed Yamal's frozen crust, the more it became clear that these craters were not simply geologic oddities, but signs of dynamic processes at work in the Arctic's permafrost. Unlike typical sinkholes caused by water erosion, these features seem to be tied to gas pressure, thawing ice, and complex interactions between temperature changes and subterranean chemistry. Some of the earliest analyses suggested that as the Arctic warmed, the active layer of seasonal thaw deepened, allowing meltwater to penetrate further into the permafrost and alter its internal balance. This shift in temperatures may not only melt ice, but could also trigger the sudden release of trapped methane gas, a potent greenhouse gas with the potential to influence global climate patterns. Geologists noticed that the composition of gases extracted from near some crater sites bore signatures inconsistent with methane drawn directly from known oil and gas reservoirs, implying that much of this gas was generated biogenically within the permafrost itself. Bacteria and organic matter buried deep within the frozen ground had slowly produced methane through biochemical reactions over countless years, and as these pockets grew, the pressure mounted until the ground above could no longer contain it. When that containment failed, the land could rupture outward with explosive effect, creating a crater that left behind a perplexing landscape of fractured earth and icy debris. Yet even with these evolving hypotheses, the expeditions to Yamal encountered enigmatic complexities that defied easy explanation. Some craters, upon formation, quickly filled with water to become isolated lakes, while others remained dry pits framed by sharp walls of frozen soil. The surrounding terrain often showed signs of rapid change, with patterns of collapse and thaw, indicating that the permafrost layer was far more dynamic than previously believed. Soviet and Russian scientists sometimes compared these phenomena to cryovolcanism, a process more commonly associated with icy moons in the outer solar system than with Earth's surface, because the craters seem to result from the deep release of fluid and gas under extreme pressure. Each expedition returned laden not just with data, but with new questions about how quickly these features could form and whether similar processes might be occurring elsewhere in the Arctic. As mapping techniques improved and satellite imagery became more precise, researchers found that the Yamal Peninsula and its neighbour, the Gidon Peninsula, hosted several such gas emission craters over the years. Remote sensing showed that some of these craters emerged in places where frost mounds once stood, hinting that a pattern of build-up and release might be part of larger permafrost dynamics previously unrecognised by earlier scientists. On the ground, the environment around these craters was stark and unforgiving. Temperatures that plummeted well below freezing made every descent into a crater a tense undertaking, as researchers balanced the urgency of scientific discovery against the perilous conditions. The steep vertical walls offered little margin for error, and the permafrost's unpredictable stability added to the risk of collapse or sudden gas emissions. Expedition journals from the region convey an atmosphere of solemn respect among field teams, who often worked in silence as they collected core samples that might unlock more clues about the subterranean world beneath them. While early public speculation veered toward dramatic causes like meteor impacts or extraterrestrial interference, the methodical investigations by Soviet and Russian experts steadily narrowed the field of plausible explanations to climate-linked geophysical phenomena. The imagery and data they gathered did more than explain individual craters. They illuminated a broader truth about the Arctic itself, that beneath the frozen facade lay forces driven by subtle shifts in temperature, chemistry, pressure, and time. This truth carried a weight of its own, one that grew heavier as researchers pieced together evidence that climate warming was not just a distant concern but something palpable in the changing face of the permafrost. By the time some of the most recent expeditions had concluded their field seasons, the craters had become symbols of a region in flux, geological markers of processes that were silent yet profound in their implications. For scientists who had devoted their careers to studying frozen ground, the Yamal craters were both a challenge and a warning, a testament to the Arctic's still mysterious mechanics and to the delicate balance that sustained its ancient ice. In that barren, trembling landscape, where emptiness had suddenly gained shape, explorers began to sense that every giant hole in the earth might be a message about what lay beneath and what was still to come. A chill wind carried the unspoken possibility that many more of these enormous craters awaited discovery, each hinting at secrets buried deep within the Arctic's frozen heart. The Canadian Arctic Expedition's unexpected land discoveries. Amid a frozen expanse where ice and sky seemed to merge, the Canadian Arctic Expedition of 1913-1916 began its careful charting of a landscape both unyielding and unknowable. The team, led by Viljamo Stephenson, had ventured north not only to map the Arctic archipelago, but to investigate claims of previously unseen islands and strange geological features hinted at in earlier, incomplete surveys. The ship, carefully threading through drifting floes, carried men whose expertise in navigation, geology, and ethnography would be tested against a wilderness that resisted both observation and understanding. From the outset, there was a sense that this Arctic voyage might reveal more than mere cartographic corrections. It could expose the hidden face of a land that had endured millennia of ice and isolation, its secrets buried under snow, wind, and time. Mist-curled along jagged ridges and frozen channels, masking the contours of land that no navigator had seen and no map had recorded. The Arctic's vastness seemed to stretch endlessly, with occasional glimpses of dark rock breaking the monotonous white. Yet each sighting offered little certainty about the true scale or arrangement of the terrain. Icebergs, grounded or drifting, created shifting obstacles that made the act of mapping perilous. Every turn of the ship brought a fresh challenge in distinguishing transient ice from solid land. This uncertainty imbued every measurement with a degree of suspense, and the explorers quickly realized that patience and repeated observation would be essential to discern reality from illusion in a region where the environment itself seemed deliberately deceptive. As the ship threaded through treacherous floes, sudden glimpses of rocky promontories hinted at islands unmarked on any known charts. From a distance, the formations appeared like mirages, their edges softened by mist and snow, yet as the expedition drew closer, their solidity could not be denied. The explorers' journals recorded the tension of these moments, the simultaneous thrill and unease of encountering land that had eluded detection for centuries. Each unexpected promontory suggested that the Arctic's geography was far more intricate than contemporary maps indicated, and that the work of discovery was far from complete, even in areas thought thoroughly explored. The crew's first encounter with Brock Island revealed cliffs that rose sharply from the icy waters, leaving the men to wonder how such land could remain hidden so long. Jagged outcrops and steep escarpments gave the appearance of permanence, yet for decades they had escaped notice, obscured perhaps by seasonal ice or the limits of previous navigational techniques. The men spent hours observing the interplay of light and shadow along the island's slopes, noting the coloration and texture of rocks and documenting features that suggested a geologic history, both violent and gradual. In these early observations, the explorers recognized the paradox of the Arctic. A landscape seemingly static and frozen could conceal dynamic processes that revealed themselves only to the patient and the attentive. Curved rock strata and dark ridges carved into the coastlines suggested processes ancient and obscure, defying simple explanation even for trained geologists among the explorers. The formation of the islands, with layers tilted or fractured in unusual ways, hinted at seismic shifts or glacial sculpting over millennia. Each rock sample collected was carefully catalogued, revealing traces of sedimentary history and chemical composition that helped explain the land's endurance in a hostile environment. The men speculated on the forces that had shaped these hidden islands, aware that their observations would contribute to a growing scientific understanding of Arctic geology while leaving lingering questions about the timing and scale of those processes. Every measurement seemed tentative, as shifting ice and fog concealed or reshaped the outlines of land, leaving charts that were provisional at best. Surveyors had to contend with distorted bearings, unreliable landmarks, and the constant drift of floating ice that could give the illusion of open water where land lay hidden, or conceal a coastline beneath a blanket of frost. Mapping became a slow, deliberate exercise in verification, requiring repeated approaches and triangulations to confirm positions. The unpredictability of the Arctic not only tested technical skill, but also demanded the explorers' judgment and intuition, forcing them to balance caution with curiosity in a realm where miscalculation could mean weeks of delay or serious risk. Sparse vegetation clung stubbornly to sheltered slopes, while scattered bird tracks hinted at life persisting in a land that otherwise appeared lifeless and silent. Small patches of moss and lichen, invisible from a distance, revealed microcosms of resilience that contrasted sharply with the barren expanses around them. For the explorers, these signs of life were reminders that the Arctic was not entirely devoid of activity. Its cycles of survival, subtle and hidden, provided insight into the island's ecological systems and underscored the delicate interplay of climate, geography, and biology that allowed life to endure even in extreme isolation. Compasses wavered, and observations conflicted with earlier surveys, revealing discrepancies that forced the expedition to question the reliability of maps drawn decades before. Some islands appeared in positions slightly different from those indicated by prior expeditions, while newly discovered landforms had no representation whatsoever. These inconsistencies prompted careful re-examination of previous charts and emphasized the ever-changing nature of Arctic ice and coastline. The expedition's cartographers had to reconcile multiple sources of information, while acknowledging that some mysteries of positioning might never be fully resolved, leaving a subtle tension between human knowledge and the environment's enigmatic authority. Occasional stone cairns and traces of past human presence suggested that, despite the Arctic's isolation, others had walked these islands long before the modern explorers arrived. Inuit hunters and travellers may have used certain islands seasonally, leaving markers or pathways that survived the harsh winters. While no permanent settlements were found, these ephemeral traces of life reminded the expedition that the Arctic had long been a realm of movement and adaptation, and that human interaction with its geography predated European exploration. Each discovery of past activity added layers to the narrative of the land, blending historical and geographical investigation with the explorers' own journey of discovery. A hush often fell over the crew as they recorded their findings, each realization of uncharted land tempered by the vast emptiness surrounding them and the uncertainty of the icebound horizon. The psychological weight of isolation, combined with the responsibility of documenting previously unknown territory, imbued each day with intensity. Observing the barren expanses, the explorers became acutely aware of the delicate balance between accomplishment and vulnerability, the thrill of discovery tempered by the Arctic's impartial and often indifferent conditions. Every observation carried both scientific and existential weight, emphasizing the immensity and unpredictability of the environment. With every newly plotted island and surveyed coast, the Arctic's geography unfolded in unexpected ways, reshaping understanding while leaving deeper mysteries intact. The accumulation of mapped points and charted formations gradually revealed the Arctic as a labyrinthine archipelago, more intricate than earlier accounts suggested. Yet for each detail recorded, additional questions emerged. Hidden channels, ice-concealed islets, and shifting tides all hinted at parts of the landscape that remained elusive. The expedition's work illuminated the known, while simultaneously casting shadows over what remained undiscovered, reinforcing the notion that the Arctic, though increasingly surveyed, retained its secrecy capacity. As the expedition set sail from the newly recorded islands, the frozen expanse behind them seemed to stretch infinitely, suggesting that countless more secrets might remain untouched. Even as the ship moved southward, the men could not shake the impression that the Arctic was both a revealed and hidden world, a place where every mapped feature might conceal another layer of mystery. The combination of harsh environment, uncharted land, and subtle ecological and geological cues created an enduring sense of wonder, leaving the explorers and those who would later study their journals with a persistent feeling that the Arctic's full story was far from complete. At the outer limits of human knowledge, the Arctic continued to guard its hidden lands and the stories they had silently carried for centuries. The Arctic Ocean Floor expedition that found a hidden ridge. In the mid-20th century, a fleet of icebreakers and research vessels ventured into the Arctic Ocean, tasked with charting a seabed that had long eluded human understanding. The expedition, composed of oceanographers, geologists and naval navigators, aimed to fill gaps left by earlier surveys, where treacherous ice and extreme cold had limited the reach of even the most daring explorers. As the vessels pressed northward, the landscape above the ice was one of stark whiteness, but the greater unknown lay hidden beneath the frozen surface. It was here, in this silent, largely unexplored expanse, that the expedition would make a discovery destined to reshape Arctic geography, a massive, previously unrecognized ridge running across the central polar seabed. Under a thick veneer of ice, the ocean stretched silently, concealing jagged underwater mountains and valleys that no eye had ever glimpsed. The crew imagined the vast darkness below, a world untouched by sunlight, where currents carved and shaped formations imperceptible from the surface. Observations were limited to intermittent sonar readings, which offered fleeting impressions of the terrain. Every charted contour seemed at once fragile and monumental, a reminder that the Arctic's hidden depths held far more than the frozen surface suggested. The silence of the water, contrasted with the constant cracking and shifting of ice above, lent the journey a sense of solemn reverence and profound mystery. Sonar pings echoed uncertainly through the frigid waters, revealing faint impressions of the seafloor while leaving the majority of its mysteries untouched. Each echo returned fragments of information, interpreted by teams of analysts who would painstakingly cross-reference multiple passes to determine the ridge's location and shape. The uncertainty inherent in early oceanographic methods meant that no discovery was confirmed immediately. What appeared as a continuous rise in one sweep could vanish entirely in another due to shifting ice or subtle errors in instrument calibration. Yet, with each tentative signal, the outline of a feature began to take shape, compelling the expedition to devote weeks of careful measurement to what would become a defining revelation. Initial readings hinted at an unexpected feature, a continuous rise in the seabed that defied all known maps and confounded the expedition's expectations. The team's instruments indicated a ridge stretching over hundreds of kilometers, with heights rising several thousand meters above the surrounding abyssal plain. Scientists were astonished, realizing that the formation represented a significant geological structure hidden for millennia beneath the polar ice. The ridge's alignment, cutting across previously charted basins, suggested a formation with tectonic implications that could not be ignored. For the crew, the experience was equal parts scientific triumph and eerie confrontation with the unknown. Repeated surveys confirmed the ridge's presence, yet each measurement seemed to uncover more complexity: jagged peaks, abrupt slopes, and unseen rises stretching across hundreds of kilometers. Navigators and geologists meticulously recorded every variation in elevation and slope, aware that even minor errors could misrepresent the ridge's true scale. The physical isolation of the vessels, combined with the Arctic's unforgiving conditions, meant that every sonar pass was a delicate balance of patience, precision, and courage. Slowly, a clearer picture emerged. This was not a minor feature, but a substantial underwater mountain chain that had eluded cartographers and explorers alike. Geologists quickly realized that this hidden formation challenged prevailing ideas about Arctic tectonics, suggesting a continental link invisible under layers of ice and water. Rock samples obtained through dredging hinted at a history of slow upheaval, tectonic shifts, and ancient collisions. The ridge appeared to connect previously separated continental fragments, implying a complex geological evolution that had shaped the Arctic seabed over millions of years. Its discovery prompted urgent discussions among the scientific community. how much of the Arctic's subsurface had been misrepresented, and what other secrets remained buried under the ice. Each answer seemed to provoke yet another question, reinforcing the sense that the Arctic held a world of hidden complexity. Blizzards, shifting pack ice, and sub-zero temperatures turned every sonar sweep into a race against the elements, with even minor mistakes threatening weeks of work. Icebreaker crews navigated treacherous flows while scientists laboured in cold, cramped conditions to log data and interpret results. At times, sudden storms forced the ships to halt, leaving the crew stranded with the knowledge that the ridge lay unmapped just below the freezing water. These environmental challenges added suspense to the endeavour, as both human and machine were tested to their limits in an arena where nature maintained strict dominion over every measurement. Other formations emerged alongside the ridge, trenches, plateaus and sediment patterns that hinted at processes both slow and violent in shaping the Arctic floor. Some slopes displayed evidence of ancient glacial activity, while others appeared to be the product of tectonic shifts or sediment accumulation. Each discovery contributed to a sense of layered mystery, as though the seabed held a chronological record of the planet's history hidden from human sight. The explorers noted how subtle variations in the sonar echoes suggested complex underwater landscapes, with features appearing and disappearing depending on the vessel's course and ice conditions. Experts debated whether the ridge represented ancient tectonic activity, glacial sculpting, or submerged remnants of a land bridge, each theory adding intrigue without fully resolving the mystery. Conferences and reports circulated among the expedition team and broader scientific networks, with proposals ranging from seismic uplift to continental drift interpretations. Despite the technical rigour of the observations, the ridge retained an air of enigma, a physical presence that defied simple categorization. This blend of verifiable data and unresolved questions heightened the tension of exploration, emphasizing that discovery in the Arctic was often accompanied by profound uncertainty. The discovery shifted not only scientific understanding but also navigational charts, drawing attention to Arctic sovereignty and the hidden complexities under the polar ice. Maps were revised to include the ridge, altering routes previously considered straightforward and compelling future expeditions to account for the newly recognized topography. While political implications arose regarding territorial claims, the more enduring impact was scientific. The Arctic Ocean was no longer a uniform expanse of water under ice, but a region defined by its intricate submerged landscapes, each feature silently recording eons of geological activity. As survey after survey confirmed the ridge's extent, the team confronted the staggering realization that much of the Arctic seafloor remained unseen, its geography still whispered to only by instruments. The data hinted at further anomalies, unmapped depressions, hidden channels, and unexpected rises that suggested the ridge was merely one element in a far more intricate underwater world. Each sonar sweep seemed to reveal fragments of a hidden narrative, a story of slow-motion transformations that human eyes might never fully witness. For the explorers, the Arctic remained a frontier in which the known and unknown coexisted in delicate, uneasy balance. When the expedition departed, the icy waters closed above the ridge, hiding it once more in silence and darkness, leaving countless questions unanswered. Even after weeks of laborious mapping and analysis, the ridge retained its mystery. Observers could chart its general path, measure its peaks, and hypothesize its origin, yet the ocean itself preserved an unknowable depth and scale, a reminder that humanity's grasp of the Arctic remained partial at best. The sense of awe lingered, for the Arctic Ocean floor was not merely a feature to be mapped, it was a vast, secret world waiting to reveal its truths on its own terms. Through the frozen Arctic expanse, unseen mountains endure, guarding secrets of the ocean that humanity has only begun to uncover. The Swedish Vega expedition through the Northeast Passage. The Vega set forth from Sweden in 1878, carrying Nordenskjöld and his crew on a voyage that would push the boundaries of Arctic navigation and confront the unknown edges of the world. Their mission was unprecedented: to traverse the Northeast Passage, sailing along the Siberian Arctic coast, a route that had defeated explorers for centuries. Every day brought a mix of anticipation and trepidation as the crew contended with icy seas, uncharted waters, and the profound isolation of the polar environment. Even as maps and compasses guided their course, it became clear that the Arctic was not merely a barrier to passage, but a realm of enigmas, where every observation hinted at stories hidden beneath centuries of snow and rock. Along endless stretches of the Siberian coast, the waters lay motionless, the only sound the distant cracking of drifting ice, as if the Arctic itself held its breath in anticipation. Snow-laden cliffs rose from the coastline, stark and unyielding, their surfaces scarred by wind and ice. The silence was occasionally broken by the call of a distant bird or the faint rumble of calving glaciers, reminders that life persisted despite the harshness of the environment. For the Vega's crew, the stillness created a sense of timelessness, as though they had entered a world frozen not only by temperature but by history, untouched and observing their every movement. Sudden gales swept across the deck, forcing the crew to contend with thick pack ice that threatened to trap the ship in its frozen grip for weeks. Ice flows shifted without warning, closing passages previously thought safe, while storms obscured the horizon and made navigation perilous. The ship's timbers groaned under the stress of crushing ice, and sailors laboured tirelessly to prevent disaster. Each obstacle reinforced the crew's awareness that the Arctic demanded both respect and vigilance, for a single miscalculation could leave the expedition stranded in isolation, at the mercy of the unforgiving polar elements. Jagged cliffs and enigmatic stone outcroppings rose unexpectedly from the shoreline, drawing the attention of the expedition and leaving questions about their origin unanswered. Some formations appeared deliberate, as though shaped by hands long vanished, while others bore natural patterns so precise that they seemed almost intentional. The crew documented these features meticulously, sketching their outlines and noting the angles and layers, aware that every rock and ridge might carry clues about the land's history and the forces that shaped it. The landscape felt alive with hidden stories, as if the Arctic itself were a keeper of secrets. Scattered remnants of old settlements and primitive fire pits hinted at visitors from a distant past, evidence that human presence in these desolate regions was far older than previously imagined. Nordenskiold's team found fragments of tools and charred stones that suggested survival strategies adapted to extreme conditions. Though these traces were sparse and often eroded, they hinted at journeys and lives that had long been forgotten by history, leaving only faint echoes on the icy coast. The discovery of such remnants underscored the notion that the Arctic was never truly empty, but a space where human endeavour had been tested and occasionally preserved in silence. Encounters with Siberian Nanets and Chukchi travellers provided guidance and stories that spoke of hidden coves and strange landmarks, though much remained deliberately unshared or enigmatic. These interactions offered both practical knowledge and glimpses into a worldview shaped by centuries of Arctic experience. Local guides spoke of treacherous currents, secret passages, and areas to avoid, their warnings often tinged with hints of history and folklore that the expedition could not fully decipher. The crew recognised that these people navigated the Arctic with an intimacy born of necessity, attuned to patterns invisible to outsiders, and that even with modern instruments, much remained beyond comprehension. Every new bend of the coastline demanded careful measurements, as ice flows and fog distorted distances and complicated the painstaking process of creating accurate charts. Nordenskiold and his assistants recorded each observation in meticulous journals, measuring latitude, longitude, and depth wherever possible, while noting anomalies in the shoreline and hazards to navigation. Their charts gradually revealed a coastline both intricate and unpredictable, its contours punctuated by hidden bays, narrow straits, and ice-clogged inlets that defied expectations. The process was slow and exacting, with uncertainty always present, a reminder that even in the age of scientific inquiry, nature retained its capacity for surprise. Unusual clusters of Arctic flora clung to rocky slopes, and the fleeting appearance of rare birds or seals added fleeting hints of life in a landscape otherwise dominated by ice and silence. Lichens and hardy mosses provided rare bursts of colour against grey stone, and the occasional movement of wildlife punctuated the monotony of the frozen expanse. These glimpses of vitality reinforced the sense that the Arctic, while inhospitable, was far from barren. Every plant and animal observed offered subtle insights into survival and adaptation, mysteries that the expedition could record but not fully explain, leaving open questions about the resilience of life in extreme environments. Occasionally, shimmering mirages and ghostly reflections danced across the horizon, moments that unsettled the crew and suggested that the Arctic held secrets beyond the material world. Icebergs and frozen cliffs sometimes appeared distorted, shifting shapes as the light changed, creating illusions that confused both eye and instrument. Such phenomena were noted in journals with careful hesitation, acknowledging their strangeness while documenting them as precisely as possible. These visual anomalies reinforced the expedition's awareness that the Arctic was a realm where perception could be deceived, where reality and illusion intertwined, leaving even seasoned navigators questioning what they truly saw. Nordenskiold and his assistants speculated about the forces shaping the coastlines, recording hypotheses in journals while acknowledging the limits of contemporary understanding. They considered glacial movements, tidal shifts, and ancient geological upheavals, weighing each observation against prior maps and reports. Yet even with systematic investigation, many features defied easy explanation, suggesting that the Arctic's formation involved a complexity beyond immediate comprehension. Scientific curiosity coexisted with humility, as the crew recognized that the passage held layers of history, both natural and human, that might remain obscured indefinitely. Delays caused by shifting ice and equipment failures tested the endurance of the crew, yet each obstacle reinforced their awareness of the Arctic's unpredictable and commanding presence. Days could be lost navigating around a single ice floe, and storms could damage instruments or force retreats from hazardous areas. The monotony of waiting was punctuated by moments of acute awareness, when the vast expanse of ice and water seemed to remind the explorers of their vulnerability. These challenges heightened the sense of suspense and respect, emphasizing that even successful navigation required a delicate balance of skill, patience, and luck. As the Vega departed the eastern reaches of Siberia, the crew reflected on the traces they had observed, aware that many of the mysteries they encountered would remain unresolved for centuries. Maps had been updated, journals filled with meticulous notes, and countless observations had been made, yet the Arctic retained a quality of secrecy, withholding the full story behind every cliff, inlet, and artifact. The expedition had revealed glimpses of a world both harsh and ancient, a region shaped by natural forces and human endeavour alike. Though the voyage concluded, the questions it raised lingered, a silent testament to the enduring enigma of the Northeast Passage. The frozen horizon seemed to stretch forever, a silent sentinel guarding secrets that would elude even the most intrepid explorers. The modern Arctic ice core expeditions and their ancient atmospheres. In Greenland's most remote ice fields, teams of scientists began extracting cylindrical cores that contained trapped air from tens of thousands of years ago, offering an unprecedented glimpse into the planet's ancient atmosphere. These ice cores, carefully retrieved from the polar plateau, acted as frozen time capsules, each layer representing a year, a season, or even a moment in Earth's climatic past. The objective was both precise and daunting, to unravel the patterns of ancient atmospheres and reconstruct the environmental conditions of eras long before human observation. From the outset, it became apparent that the ice preserved not only chemical traces but also silent stories of storms, volcanic eruptions, and abrupt climate fluctuations that had shaped the Arctic world over millennia. Endless fields of pristine ice stretched to the horizon, broken only by distant ridges and the glint of sunlight off sharp snowdrifts that seemed untouched by time. The drilling camps appeared minuscule against this vast, silent expanse, with tents and machinery dwarfed by the whiteness surrounding them. Winds swept across the plateau with a biting intensity, carrying clouds of powdery snow that transformed familiar landscapes into ghostly shapes. Within this frozen theatre, scientists moved cautiously, aware that the environment itself could alter or destroy their delicate instruments, and that every observation carried the weight of potential discovery or disappointment. Metre by metre, the drill penetrated layers compacted over millennia, revealing a frozen chronology that recorded the planet's climatic shifts with meticulous fidelity. Each segment brought the team deeper into the past, exposing strata formed during epochs of warming and cooling, volcanic upheavals, and atmospheric changes that modern humans could only theorize about. The process demanded painstaking care. Cores were encased in protective tubes, transported under strict temperature controls, and catalogued with precision to preserve the integrity of every bubble and mineral fragment. As the drill advanced, the crew felt the tangible passage of time beneath their feet, a connection to Earth's history encoded in frozen water. Tiny air bubbles suspended in the translucent ice carried chemical traces of past atmospheres, a silent archive of gases that had once circulated over long-forgotten landscapes. These minute pockets of ancient air allowed scientists to measure levels of carbon dioxide, methane, and other compounds with remarkable accuracy. Each bubble represented a snapshot of a moment in time, providing insights into conditions on the planet tens of thousands of years ago. As researchers examined these trapped gases, a sense of wonder emerged. Within the ice lay evidence not only of predictable cycles, but also of sudden events that hinted at abrupt climatic shifts beyond current understanding. Sudden and unexplained rises in methane and carbon dioxide emerged from some layers, suggesting abrupt climatic events that challenged conventional models of gradual change. These anomalies were recorded meticulously, with teams cross-referencing layers against other global data to confirm their authenticity. The spikes were irregular, sometimes appearing over just a few years of ice accumulation, and provoked intense discussion among climatologists about their origin. Some hypothesized rapid thaw events, others volcanic activity, while a few suggested that unknown natural phenomena could have influenced these ancient atmospheres, leaving the mystery unresolved but undeniably compelling. Thin strata of volcanic ash and microscopic dust were embedded in the ice, evidence of distant eruptions and storms that had reached far beyond their origins, leaving cryptic imprints behind. Each deposit told a story of global connectivity. Eruptions from continents away had left traces in Greenland's ice, preserving events that occurred thousands of kilometers from the drilling sites. These layers were meticulously sampled, their composition analyzed to reveal chemical fingerprints that could link them to specific volcanoes or dust storms. Yet, some layers defied explanation, containing particles that did not match known sources, hinting at events or processes that scientists had yet to identify. Harsh winds and temperatures that plunged far below freezing tested both equipment and human endurance, demanding precision in every movement to prevent contamination or loss of the delicate cores. The teams operated in tents and prefabricated shelters, often labouring through exhaustion and frostbite risk to ensure every sample was carefully logged. Transporting cores from drilling sites to laboratories thousands of kilometres away required insulated containers, specialised handling protocols, and a constant awareness that even minor mishandling could compromise centuries of data. These conditions reinforced the Arctic's role as both protector and arbiter of the secrets it held, allowing only the most careful observers access to its frozen archive. Certain sequences of ice layers depicted temperature swings so sudden they hinted at a planet capable of abrupt and extreme transformations, almost imperceptible to those living through them. Within a few centimetres of ice, evidence suggested decades of warming followed by rapid cooling, periods that modern humans might scarcely believe possible. The implications were profound. Earth's climate had undergone episodes of instability that were both sudden and widespread, leaving clues in the chemical composition of gases and the orientation of crystalline structures. Each revelation deepened the sense of suspense, underscoring how much remained unknown about the forces that shaped the planet long before human records began. Analyses prompted intense discussion over whether volcanic eruptions, solar fluctuations, or unknown forces were responsible for the anomalies recorded, leaving a sense of unresolved intrigue among the team. Conferences, papers, and debates ensued as scientists attempted to reconcile observations with existing climate models. No single explanation accounted for all the data, and the gaps became part of the mystery. The ice preserved evidence of events that challenged both theory and expectation. The Arctic, in its silence, seemed to dare humanity to fully understand the complexity of its past, offering clues while withholding answers. By comparing ancient atmospheric conditions with modern measurements, scientists began to glimpse the fragility and volatility of Earth's climate, revealing both parallels and profound uncertainties. Patterns of carbon dioxide and methane suggested that even minor shifts could precede drastic environmental changes, emphasizing the delicate balance sustaining current ecosystems. Yet, the ice cores also showed resilience, recording periods of stability and recovery, a reminder that Earth's climate is both fragile and enduring. The interplay of these discoveries created a narrative that was at once scientific and almost mythical, an archive written in ice but echoing far beyond it. Patterns emerging from multiple cores began to suggest larger global events, connecting ice layers separated by thousands of kilometers in a silent, frozen testimony to Earth's history. When cores from Greenland were compared with those from Antarctica, correlations emerged that hinted at worldwide climate phenomena occurring in synchrony. Some of these events coincided with known volcanic eruptions or meteor impacts, while others appeared without a clear cause, raising questions about processes that remained hidden from contemporary understanding. Each core added a piece to a puzzle whose complete picture was tantalizingly out of reach. As the field camp was dismantled and helicopters lifted the teams away, the Arctic remained unchanged, its ice holding stories that would challenge generations of explorers and scientists yet to come. The camp's machines and instruments would vanish, but the frozen layers beneath remained, impervious to time and human interference. The silence of the ice was both a relief and a challenge, a reminder that while scientists could read fragments of the past, the full story would remain partially veiled, preserved in patient stillness for those willing to seek it anew. Each layer of ice holds a fragment of a world long vanished, a secret the Arctic has preserved in stillness, waiting for those patient enough to listen.